Good evening. I would like to call to order the August 21st, 2023 City of Delray Beach Planning and Zoning Board. Ms. Miller, is the recorder on?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. If you could please call the roll.
Gregory Snyder.
Here.
Christina Morrison.
Here.
Alan Zeller.
Here.
Gregory Snyder. Oh, I'm sorry. Chris Brown.
Here.
Julian Blankenship.
Here.
Chris Davey.
Here. Let the record show all members are in
I
attendance.
missed somebody.
You didn't Joy.
Yes, Joy Howell.
Here. You wrote her off already.
Let the record show all 7 members of the board are here.
Diane's ahead of herself.
She's reading
No, I
off.
thought I was
She's
missing
reading
somebody.
off next month.
Exactly.
Okay. If I could, I've been asked by the city staff to please reorder the agenda, and if we could make 9A item 8A and make the current 8A 8B or 8AA.
Motion to approve the revised.
And then
Please.
we have the applicant here for item 8B. They're requesting postponement.
Okay, so if we could at the same time, if the board is inclined, excuse me, Ms. Dassery, are they looking for postponement to a date certain or just postponement
So
to?
we're still not doing the date certain,
We're not, okay.
so we can just remove 8B, make 8A, 8B, and 9A will become 8A.
That sounds good to me.
Yeah.
I have to think about that for a second, Mr. Bennett, thank you.
Mr. Chair, but
Yes.
9A is a legislative item, it's not a quasi-judicial item.
Those headings are largely just for organizational purposes. I don't think that there's an issue with moving 9A to be 8A under an order perspective, even though we have 8 as quasi-judicial. It's really just informational headings, so I don't think there's an issue with that.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Ms. Dassery, thank you. If I could get a motion to that effect, make removing item 8B from the agenda, making the current item 8A, 8B, and making 9A item 8A, and then 9B would become 9A.
Motion to approve the revised agenda.
Second.
Let the record show, motion by Ms. Howell, second by Ms. Morrison. Ms. Miller, if you could please call the roll.
Gregory Snyder.
Yes.
Christina Morrison.
Yes.
Alan Zeller.
Yes.
Joy Howell.
Yes.
Chris Brown.
Yes.
Julian Blankenship.
Yes.
Chris Davey.
Yes. Let the record show the agenda has been modified and approved by a vote of 7-0. Now move into item number 4. Have all my colleagues had an opportunity to review the minutes for July 17th, 2023, and are there any amendments to the minutes?
No, motion to approve as stated.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Morrison, second by Ms. Howell. Ms. Miller, if you could please call the roll.
Gregory Snyder.
Yes.
Christina Morrison.
Yes.
Alan Zeller.
Yes.
Joy Howell.
Yes.
Chris Brown.
Yes.
Julian Blankenship.
Yes.
Chris Davey.
Yes, let the record show the minutes of July 17, 2023 were approved 7-0. I will now ask members of the public or anybody in the audience to please rise and be sworn by our board secretary. If you plan on speaking at the meeting this evening, please rise and be sworn.
Please raise your right hand. By the authority vested in me, the notary of the state of Florida, do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. I'm now going to read the quasi-judicial hearing rules for this evening. This hearing shall be conducted in accordance with the City of Delray Beach quasi-judicial rules. The applicant and the city shall be permitted to present their case. The public shall be allowed to speak for 3 minutes each or a maximum of 6 minutes if the person represents an organization or a group of people who are present but agree not to speak. The board members, staff, and the applicant may be allowed to cross-examine a witness. The city or the applicant will be allowed to offer rebuttal testimony. The decision to approve or deny an application or appeal may not legally be made upon personal views as to whether a project is a good project or not, nor may a decision be based on the number of citizens who support or oppose a particular project. The law requires that all decisions must be made on the basis of whether the project meets the requirements of law, the comprehensive plan, and the land development regulations. Thank you. I will now ask, we're moving on to item number 6, would be comments from the public. Is there any member of the public here this evening who wishes to speak on an item that is not on our agenda? If you wish to speak about an item that is not on our agenda, now is your opportunity to come to the podium and speak for 3 minutes. Seeing nobody rising, public comment is closed. And we can now move in to item 8A, which would be the old agenda item number 9A. And Mr. Bennett, even though there's a legislative item, do we have to disclose ex parte on this?
No, there's no need for ex parte and technically no need for public comment. I know that you've already done the first 2 meetings for the capital improvements plan,
Yes.
but sometimes this has a little bit more public interest. If you're inclined to take public comment, you can.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, good evening. For the record, Rebecca Dostery, Development Services. So I'm going to briefly go through some of the criteria that are related to the review and approval of the of the capital improvements element, and then we have our representatives here from Public Works Utilities to go over some of the major expenditures. Need to turn my microphone on. Then we have Public Works here to go over the actual items within the capital improvements plan. So the state requires that the municipal governments adopt a comprehensive a capital improvements element in the 5-year schedule of capital improvements every year. It's not considered a comp plan amendment, but the board does that, and then the Planning and Zoning Board is responsible for determining if it's consistent with the adopted comprehensive plan. Oh, and I'm so sorry. This has been, there were no numbers in there. So Cynthia Buisson from Public Works will be going over those numbers. There are a number of policies throughout the comprehensive plan related to mobility and maintenance of public infrastructure and the maintenance of our coastal resources. So a lot of the expenditures that you'll see within the plan are related to these areas. After the board here makes a recommendation, it will be going to City Commission for first reading on September 5th, and then second reading and adoption on September 18th. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up the presentation from Public Works here, and she can give you an overview of the important things to note. Oh, I'm sorry, I've got...
Hi, thank you. Good evening.
Thank you.
I'm Cynthia Busan. I'm the Assistant Director of Public Works. And I will be going through the CIP presentation. This presentation is generally the same presentation that was given to Commission last week. I've made a few changes throughout that I'll explain to you as I go, because it differs also from the materials that you were provided, just based on decisions that have been made by management to date since that presentation.
Is your mic on?
Yes.
It's hard to hear.
It is. I'm just short, so I have to like lean forward. But I'll do my best to speak up. Okay, so the CIP budget by department is kind of a way that we can pie chart out the entire CIP budget, just so you see generally where the money's going. The lion's share appears to be going to Public Works. That's because the Public Works Department manages the CIP program for the city. But I'll get into further the individual funds, and that kind of shows you where the actual money is being spent citywide. But looking at the CIP budget total, it's about $111 million this year. So first fund is the Special Projects Fund. That's going to consist of the tree planting program, which is a continuation of our sustainability department's goal to plant trees throughout the city to increase tree canopy. And then it also includes parking technology improvements. The next fund is the Recreation Impact. That is a parks fund, so all the projects included here include improvements to different parks facilities, whether it be pavilions, playgrounds, the restroom trailer, AC replacement for the community center, and a scoreboard for Hilltopper. The Beautification Fund has $100,000 for increased maintenance of the medians. The gas tax is a fund that allows us to use it towards pedestrian and mobility, so that's what we have been allocating that funding for each year. This coming year, we have $450,000 for right-of-way ADA improvements, and then we have an additional $40,000 for Andrews Avenue streetscape improvements to kind of improve some pedestrian mobility along there. There's also the building fund. We have $4 million allocated. That's to make some improvements to the north side of the City Hall compound, primarily the building and planning and zoning departments. There's also the beach fund. That's the one that Rebecca had alluded to in terms of, coastal program tying back to the comprehensive plan. For this coming year, they're mainly annual services we do there. Dune management is an annual task where we trim the dunes semi-annually. Turtle nest monitoring is a state requirement by our permits for our beach nourishment. Same thing with the beach nourishment program monitoring. That's where we take bathymetric and topographic surveys of our beach profile each year, and we submit that to the state and the federal to track and monitor our beach program, how our beach contour is changing and when we might need our next nourishment. Also included is continuation of our Blue Flag Award. And at the bottom there, you'll see beach nourishment, and we got approved for a storm repair project based on Hurricane Nicole from last year. So the Army Corps of Engineers will be coming in and placing sand on our beach in fiscal year 25-26, and that's the city's portion of that to add advanced fill in addition to what the Army Corps is going to do for the program. So general construction is one of our bigger funds. It's a catch-all, so it includes primarily CRA and TPA funded projects. On this list, you'll see that there are 3 CRA projects on this sheet. There's a few on the next I'm going to show you in a second. The biggest one being Pompey Park. That should be going to construction in the coming year. Northwest Neighborhoods is a complete neighborhood project. That one is presently in design, and in the next 5 years it should be going into construction and wrapping up construction. There's also some drainage improvements to Artist Alley, and then we have presently 5 TPA projects in differing phases. 3 of those will be going to construction next year. AC replacements is down there at the bottom. That's a programmatic thing that every year, being in South Florida, we need to replace AC units on all of the city infrastructure. So that's a program to keep up with that program. We have Delray Beach Historical Society campus improvements. They'll be getting some improvements to the facility here across the street for $210,000. PC replacement, that's a IT program to replace computers on an annual basis as they get past their useful life. We have 2 items for fleet fuel dispenser replacements and also a software upgrade. And then the 3 items I highlighted at the bottom there, the reason I highlighted those is those are different from, again, the material you've received to date. So originally we had wheel alignment equipment for $65,000. That's been changed for Neighborhood Resource Center improvements. And then we also added the 2 projects at the very bottom, being CRA Curry Commons restrooms for $600,000 and CRA implementation of Old School Square Master Plan for $500,000. And so the CRA just denotes that the funding source is coming from the CRA. Next fund is the infrastructure surtax. That's primarily transportation-related projects, given that the funding source is the surtax. We also are adding some additional funds to the historic train depot, or the Delray Beach Seaboard Airline Railway Station. I'm just used to calling it a train depot, but the over here off 95, we'll be doing some interior modifications to make the space usable for office space. And then additional money towards the replacement of Fire Station 113 that construction should be commencing in the coming months. Southeast 36 and Gulfstream, that's a joint project with Boynton Beach. We own half, they own half, so we're both going in together to make improvements to that roadway in the coming year. And then North Swinton Roadway, that project also, we have funding this year, and then we'll have funding next year. The project will be built in 2 phases, and that's to continue the remainder of Swinton that hasn't been done to date, so from 2nd all the way up to the city limits. Water and sewer, that's another big lift. They have obviously the water treatment plant that they're looking to replace in the coming years, so they have a good chunk of change for that. They have 12 mil next year, and you can see 20 to 50 mil in the following 3 years. There's money there for Marineway, seawall, stormwater, and roadway improvements. That's the money that comes out of water and sewer fund is primarily only for water and sewer type infrastructure associated with that project. Water treatment plant improvements, that's improvements to the existing water treatment plant. New wells, that's new wells for raw water to be going into the water treatment systems. Telemetry system upgrades, they have that planned over the next 3 years. I put deep injection well piping. I highlighted the number there because that number differs from the materials that you've been given. It was originally 1.2, and I think they received new information from the folks at the wastewater treatment plant that it was going to be higher, so we raised it to 2 mil. Also, generator replacements, water meter replacements. Now we get into more of like their maintenance types items, so VFDs for their pump stations, chemical tanks for the water treatment plant, more water treatment plant improvements, the force main replacement from all the way to the wastewater treatment plant up in Boynton, hydrant maintenance, replacement of utility generators, and additional reclaimed water. And then this slide here, most of it is future out years, so this will come back to you next year with either more accurate numbers or it'll have changed based on whatever the need is identified in fiscal 24-25. But the fund request ask for fiscal 23-24 for water and sewer is almost 32 mil. Next is the municipal golf course. Their funding was relatively limited in the coming year, so the 2 items that are being funded out of that include the underground fuel tank, which is going to be removed and replaced as it's problematic, the one that's out there now, and then historic golf course restoration. Lakeview Golf Course includes cart path repair, golf course equipment, and golf cart barn. Stormwater has a few sizable projects going on right now. I mentioned earlier the historic Marineway, seawall, roadway, and drainage improvements. That's putting a new seawall along Marineway, raising that road, and then creating a promenade, and then adding a pump station that will drain that entire basin there, and then some additional drainage improvements throughout that community. Also, Thomas Street Pump Station should be going to construction just as soon as we can get the easements. So that's projected out over the next few years. One thing I didn't mention, and that's not captured in these slides, but it is captured in the CIP book that was shared with you, is a lot of these projects are not a lot, but some of these projects have a grant funding associated with them. So while the number you see here is 2.2 million for Thomas Street Pump Station, we did receive several grants. So all of that detail of exactly what the city's portion and exactly what the grant funding is available on the individual CIP sheets if you want to see the allocation. And we also, the Coastal Resiliency Adaptation Plan, that was another grant project. That's a continuation from our vulnerability study. And then one item we have on there at the bottom, replacement of seawalls. That's kind of a maintenance item. The city has a mile of seawalls citywide, and we've already got about half a mile raised up to appropriate heights for today. So we're still looking to continue to do that throughout the rest of the half mile we have. A few remaining stormwater projects include Lakeview Drive drainage improvements and stormwater education artwork. And so the total of the stormwater CIP this year is just over $12 million. Cemetery has just the cemetery mausoleum project that has been ongoing through design. They hope to go to construction for one mausoleum next year and then another mausoleum in the following year. City garage, we have a few fire vehicles, including the suppression engine, the aerial truck, and the rescue. Those 3 vehicles are proposed to be replaced as a part of a heavy equipment lease. So those 3 will be acquired together, and by purchasing them together today, we achieve a cost savings over the long term, just based on the way the numbers are increasing and paying up front. You get credits towards equipment for those vehicles. And then the vehicle replacement is 1.75. That's just standard, cop cars, code enforcement cars, just the general fleet replacement vehicles. One item that's not on here anymore is the street sweeper is actually coming off. So that item will not be asked for in the coming year. And then there's a debt payment associated with the heavy equipment lease, and that's $800,000. So that puts our garage fund total at 6.5 for the coming year, with a little less because we, as I mentioned, we're taking off that sweeper. Recreation Go Bond. This fund is likely to have a few changes. There was a meeting earlier this afternoon with city management as to which items can and should be funded under this source. So some might fluctuate a little bit, but as of right now, this is the list for the Go Bond for next year. It includes public restrooms in the parks improvements, tennis stadium enhancements, athletic field lighting, beach access improvements, beach master plan, showers and fountains, just on a regular replacement cycle that's been about 5 years they're due, beach main pavilion structural repairs, Delray Beach Tennis Center locker, and Hilltopper elevator, also the Miller Park elevator. And then the remaining items are for future years. So our proposed project list for the fiscal 23-24 is about 5.5 from the Go Bond Fund. Next is the Public Safety Go Bond. That one we have starting the new police department headquarters. That'll be essentially starting the design and the considerations for space needs and where and how it's going to be laid out. Next is replacement of Fire Station 112. That one's on the barrier island. It needs help. So we'll be starting investigations and potentially design on that one in the coming year. And then ocean rescue, locker room and storage improvements. So that puts our total fiscal 23-24 ask for public safety bonds at 4.15. And that is all I had for you today. I hope I didn't bore you too much, and I'm here if you have any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Brisson. Thank you. With that, I guess I can turn to my colleagues and ask my colleagues have any questions. Do we want to open it up to public comment? What are the thoughts of my colleagues?
Sure.
Sure. Sure.
Is that okay?
Same
fine.
for me.
Okay. With that, we can open it up to, just wanted to get a consensus. Is there any member of the public who would like to come up to the podium where Ms. Brisson was standing and make a comment on the presentation? Seeing nobody rising, public comment wasn't really necessary, I guess.
It's nice to ask.
It's nice to ask, though. Very good point, Ms. Morrison.
I do have a couple of questions.
Feel free to start, Mr.
Okay.
Zeller.
So with, is there any consideration of paving Swenton from like 8th Street to 22nd Street? That is a terrible.
The North Swinton project that I discussed will pave the whole north side of Swinton from Northeast Second, from Lake
To the
Ida all the
city
way.
line,
Yeah, to
isn't
the
that
city
what you
line.
said?
Right.
Yes.
Okay, and I have a general question. Once they pave the street, for example, on George Bush from Swinton down to like the railroad tracks, they paved that maybe within the last year. And then they already cut into that road for some other type of repair. Is there a limitation that the city has to prevent cutting into a road once it's been paved for a time period?
I know the.
Yeah, so that's a tricky one. I mean, I can tell you that when we design these road projects, especially one as large as North Swinton, we definitely collaborate with other utility owners in the area. And so, of course, the city has water and sewer infrastructure throughout. So we did work with the water and sewer department to identify which water mains and which sewer mains they felt were in need of replacement, and those will be replaced as a part of the project. That said, they're not replacing everything, and
Things do break.
stuff happens. so if there's a water main break that wasn't identified on, a water main that's aging, that wasn't problematic prior, if it breaks, it breaks.
They have to get a permit? I mean, I can see some type of exception for utility repairs, which is what I think happened on that section. I don't know, they were doing something with cable or whatever, but if a developer needed to cut into the road to tie into utilities or whatever after it's paved, there's no limitation on that? There's no restriction?
There's not a restriction. We would, as you mentioned, they would have to permit it, and there's certain city standards, so they have to go back a certain number of feet either direction. They have to tie in, they have to get inspections to make sure that it's a smooth transition. But if they needed to cut into our road to pass a utility that couldn't be
Declined.
Yeah.
Could not be declined, right?
Right.
Because what happens if a project gets approved, Ms. Zeller, like 6 months after they just put in the brand new road?
Yeah.
The developer still has a right to go into it. The cities and counties typically do notice the utility providers, like, hey, we're going to be paving this road. Get some work done ahead of time. But as Ms. Busan accurately stated, blank happens.
Is there a time frame on one of my pet projects, the Marine Way roadway that's down there, that's been in the works for at least 7-8 years?
Yeah, we're
The northern part of Marine Way.
the northern part of it. So you're talking about just south of Atlantic.
From like First Street, First Avenue, First Street, north toward Atlantic, that
Right.
part.
Yeah, so that project is the one that I mentioned, is designed and permitted. We intend to go into construction in the coming year. That said, it will be a multi-year project. It consists of drainage throughout the neighborhood. It includes a very sizable pump station, stormwater pump station, in addition to the seawall and then the roadway. So yes, it's coming. It'll start, but it'll likely be a few years yet to be seen.
Okay. And is in item or section number 117, the recreation impact fee, the pavilion replacements, is there a listing of which pavilions get replaced?
There may very well be. Parks has that. Parks is the one who maintains those, and so they're aware of which ones are in better shape or worse shape. So I can certainly have someone from Parks contact you and see if there's a list on the condition and which ones are coming first or second.
Okay. Same question with section 382, the public restroom renovation and beach access improvements? Are there lists of where they are?
So one at a time, doing the first one first, which was, fresh my memory, it's already escaped me. What was the first one you mentioned?
Restrooms.
Thank you, restrooms. That would also be a parks question. I know that they're working to improve the restrooms at all of the parks, and they've already started at the ones along the beach, but I don't have a list necessarily of their priority projects. But I would imagine that someone in parks does, if you need that information. And then for the beach access improvements, we are looking, the goal of that project is to not necessarily remove, but decrease the need to pump sand off of the storm drain, the shower drains, because the shower drains fill up with sand and then they pond. So the idea is to trap sand that's coming west off the beach, and so it's going to just be small walls at the entrances of the beach. So it's whatever entrances that slope upwards as the dune goes over out onto the beach. Those are the ones that need those little access walls just to block the sand from coming in.
From coming onto the sidewalk shower area.
Yes.
And then clogging the drains and forcing
Exactly.
the back up. That
I
makes
asked-
sense.
I asked that because last year, there was discussion of replacing the restrooms at Atlantic Dunes Park, and to do that, they were going to remove hundreds of those trees, pine trees and whatever, so I was
That project is not in this list.
Pardon me?
That project is not in this list. It is not moving forward at this time.
All right, because we were concerned about the removal of those trees.
Of the Australian pines? Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Ms. Snyder, please.
Yeah, this is my first time looking at one of these, so I have a couple of probably naive questions. It's a kind of it's a very nice plan. Can I expect to see that everything on this list has been worked on a year from now?
In a perfect world.
You know, that's a tricky one to answer because it does feel like sometimes when you're looking at the list, if a project continues year over year, that it's just not moving. But it's true that a project takes a long time to come to be, you know?
No, I'm not saying are they all going to be done a year from now.
Right.
But, for instance, you just said that the Atlantic Dunes restroom thing that was concerned over the trees now is no longer on the table, but it was on the table last year.
I mean, the reason it's off the table is because of the trees. We couldn't get support for it. So the trees are the issue with that project
I mean,
specifically.
I don't know how it's a general question. The fact that all these things are on here means that, and if they're approved, something should happen on all of them.
Yes.
They don't fall out later in the budgeting process.
Typically not. There is a chance something can get peeled off for another reason.
Okay.
The city may have a catastrophic failure at another structure, and they have to move the structure, and they're going to move the improvement of this bathroom back 2 years. Or a lot of the work, as I noticed, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but like with the future police station,
Yeah.
it was $2 million, then $7 million being spent, but that's all behind the scenes in design contracts
yeah.
and everything else. So that work's being done, but
Yeah. it
there's
doesn't
no
mean I'll-
visible signs of
Right.
it to the
So,
rest of the population.
What I'm saying is this is a plan, not a dream list.
Right,
Yes.
exactly.
Okay, and there's a couple of things that I have interest in get done. That's why I asked that question.
Sure.
My other naive question is, when you look at some of these beach restoration items, dune management, sea turtle nesting, and beach nourishment, there's money for design and preliminary study. Always. I mean, it never gets out of design and preliminary study.
That's for the beach nourishment one? Oh, you're talking about, you're looking at the,
sea turtle nesting, the dune management, and I believe it's the beach nourishment monitoring.
and that's what you're talking about as a result of the way that the CIP sheet is set up. The CIP sheet has design and construction. So for a task that's monitoring, that's going to happen every single year,
Okay.
it's kind of hard. It doesn't fit in
There
one of
is
those.
no design, right?
Okay.
Yeah, so it's just how it had to be labeled on that sheet. It's the most applicable category.
Oh, thank you. I said it, I'm naive at this.
No, there are no naive questions. There are questions. Mr. Snyder, please. Mr. Brown?
I have no further questions.
Ms. Blankenship?
I'll just say that I saw Ms. Barletta led in very detailed discussions last commission meeting, so all of my questions were answered then. But thank you.
You got it.
Just, I assume the sidewalks are not included in the Swinton project? I know some of the neighbors up there north of 22nd have complained about the sidewalks there. They want to know why the sidewalks can't be as nice as the Boynton Beach sidewalks that are just beyond it.
There is a sidewalk component to the project.
Oh, there
We're
is.
still working on getting easements from some of the adjacent property owners. There's some property line concerns up on the very north side. So we're working with the individual property owners to get easements in place, but it will include sidewalks through the corridor.
That's great. Okay, terrific. And what did they end up with the Old School Square master plan? I saw that was budgeted there.
I can answer that this much at this point. So there is a master plan that was created in 2017.
Right.
From what I have seen of it, a lot of the things included in phase 1 have already happened, but there are some ideas of maybe adding, I've heard different things, additional access, pedestrian access, making it easier for things like Green Market and other things, but I don't think that there is an actual plan as it stands. I think the plan is to set aside that money and then early in the fiscal year have a presentation to commission presenting a few options. Hey, this is how much money we got. These are maybe a few ideas, and getting commission's input onto exactly what they wish to do.
Okay, I just wondered. I know that plan was done at one point, but I think there had been some discussion about redoing parts of it. Maybe there was a little too much concrete there. That was kind of one of the things. Tree planting, wonderful, so glad. When are we going to get some sort of a program that will maintain our existing tree canopy? Is there any way to do anything? And the last I heard, we still hadn't solved the problem. The tree planting can only be taking place on public lands, which is just a tiny portion of what we have in the city. And the question was there something that could be done in terms of developing a policy where you could have, I don't know. First of all, trees preserved in a better sense, because the in lieu fund that developers pay into, or homeowners, whatever, when they take the big trees down, typically those funds don't come back to the neighborhood from where you took the tree. So that neighborhood's missing its tree canopy. We just had a huge tree come down on 7th Avenue, Northeast 7th Avenue, probably 50 years old. And I'm sure the developer paid into the fund, but I'm also sure that 7th Avenue and the Palm Trail area will not get any portion of that fund back. So I just feel like we still have some work to do trying to figure this out on the tree portion. But I commend you guys for, at least having the goal and putting the 10,000 trees in place.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sure.
Ms. Morrison, please.
Okay. Thank you for your report. It's really, really good report. I just have a few odds and end question. On the Crest Theater AC replacements, who's paying for that? Is that the city or the CRA?
That item is actually not on the list anymore. On the 334, when I had the general fund up, I think I showed the few items highlighted at the bottom. It's been...
Oh, I thought this was the latest list on our...
So if you
backup.
see here, at the bottom, the fuel dispenser, fleet software, and neighborhood resource, those 3 items are actually replace the Crest Theater ACs.
So the Crest Theater isn't getting new ACs?
So as a part of the work that's ongoing right now out there, we are making repairs to a lot of the equipment. We are doing some air handler replacements, but it's as a part of the work that's going on right now. So we will not be doing another project next year.
Okay, and thank you for including Germantown Avenue paving in your plan for the next few years. That's really needed. Thank you. The Fire Station 112, it says the construction will take place in 25-26. Isn't that after the Highland Beach contract ends?
112 is the one just north of Atlantic.
Right. But there's no station south of that yet, right? Because we're losing Highland Beach.
Yeah, and I don't think, as far as I know, there's no intent to add a station south of that. The fire station 112 would be rebuilt in its current location.
Yep.
Wow. But still, the construction of this fire station that's now going to take over the whole beach area, isn't that what you just said? It's going to handle the whole beach area. It isn't going to be constructed till after the Highland Beach contract ends? Like, what's going to happen in the interim?
The fire station 112 right now is an operating facility.
Oh, right, I realize that.
Oh, okay.
So it'll stay operating in its current capacity and its current location while it's under construction?
Well, all of that is yet to be seen. Design hasn't even started. Like, we haven't even started. We set aside the funding to start design next year. We know that there's structural issues there, that it needs to happen, but we haven't put into consideration exactly what that's going to look like. It very well could be that there's something similar to what's happening at 113, that there's a temporary trailer staged elsewhere to service the barrier island, but I couldn't tell you what that looks like today.
They may have to use something like Anchor Park temporarily or
God.
something like
That's
that.
a problem. Whoa.
In what respect?
That we're losing the Highland Beach station,
Well, the Highland Beach station was never our station.
but still it serviced the south part of the island for us, the south part of Delray Beach. Up to
Okay.
Linton, up to Linton,
Careful.
Yeah.
up to Linton.
Here's
Right.
Missy. There's Missy.
Missy, you magically appeared.
It's like magic.
I know. Thank you.
Good evening, Missy Barletta, Public Works Director. In the coming year, the fire department will be embarking on a new accreditation program.
Right.
As part of that accreditation, they evaluate all of the response times, the equipment, where equipment needs to be housed, and that sort of thing. All of those things will be taking into consideration the replacement of Fire Station 112 exactly in its same locale, and bringing forward how we will be accommodating all of the response times to make sure that everything stays the same for the barrier island once the Highland Beach fire station is moved over to Highland Beach.
It's no longer used by city personnel, right?
Yes.
By our city personnel.
Right, but I'm sure that, there are interlocal agreements
Of course.
with all fire departments, so I'm
Right.
sure that there won't be a lapse in service or any kind of a diminished service.
Of course not.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
The parking technical improvements, does that include new charging stations, or does it just include the new parking management thing you're adding?
Yeah, that does not include new charging stations right now.
Okay.
We have a number of charging stations around the city. We have several inside the Old School Square garage that many people don't know about. There are many in the iPit garage that people don't know about. We have, I think, 19 charging stations around the city right now, which is a high percentage compared to some of our neighbors. We don't have any plans at this time to create new charging areas. The amount that's in the budget for the parking technology will be toward making it easier for the public to find a parking spot when they come to downtown. So there will be an application available on your phone. There are sensors in every parking spot. So we'll be able to say in this general area there are 10 parking spaces available. So before you leave the house, you know where you're going, so you don't need to do the constant drive around
Square the block.
unless just driving up and down Atlantic Avenue is how you have fun.
Yeah.
So
And
other than that,
that is the case in
for some people, that is the case.
The median money, $100,000 for medians in the parks. What about the medians along Atlantic Avenue and Federal Highway and that are really disheveled? Are they anywhere in the budget to be maintained?
Sure. Parks and Recreation does all of the right-of-way medians. So it says, it's worded somewhat like it looks like it's just medians that are adjacent to parks, but
Right.
that 100,000 will be to supplement all of the medians throughout the city, not just in park areas.
Wow. Doesn't seem like a lot of money, and a lot of them need to be maintained, but I understand. City Hall Building Fund, $4 million. is that for the planning building or for the main city hall?
That is to look at the north end of City Hall where the building department, planning and zoning is, and the neighborhood and community services. You would be hard pressed to realize it if you took a tour of the north end of City Hall. But we have well over 100 employees that sit in that end of this building.
I know.
Some of them are in less than excellent workspaces. So that money will be used to look at what our space needs are in 5 and 10 years, do some kinds of structural improvements to the north end of the building, and create better, more workable environment for our employees.
Do you envision expanding that building or taking it up a story, or is there any plan yet? Is there a wish list at least?
Maybe we're going to start looking at construction. We're going to start looking at a design for what the future of City Hall will look like, and we're looking at the entire campus. I don't know that it will be part of that particular effort, but we are looking at making our existing buildings work for us as they are.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Morrison. Great. Ms. Busan?
Yes.
I have no comments for you. Great presentation. So,
Thank you.
do you need a vote on this? I don't believe.
Yes, it's actual.
We do? Recommendation?
So it's actual ordinance. The ordinance will be adopting a comp plan amendment by adopting the CIP plan. So Rebecca has looks like she has the motions up there on the slide, but we do need a recommendation.
Perfect.
You have
Go ahead.
recommend approval to City Commission of Ordinance number 33-23, amending Chapter 3, performance. Am I in the right one?
Provide a statement.
Okay. Provide a statement of finding that the proposed 5-year capital improvement plan for federal year 23-24 through fiscal year 27-28 and the fiscal year 23-24 capital improvement budget as set forth in ordinance number 29-23 are consistent with a comprehensive plan.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Blankenship, second by Mr. Snyder. Ms. Miller, if you could please call the roll.
Gregor Snyder,
Yes.
Christina Morrison, Alan Zeller,
Yes.
Joy Howell,
Yes.
Chris Brown,
Yes.
Julian Blankenship,
Yes.
Chris Davy.
Yes. Let the record show the board voted 7-0 to find that the CIP plan is consistent with the comprehensive plan. Thank you, Ms. Busan. Have a good night, Ms. Barletto.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We can now move on to item number 8B on the revised agenda, which would be 8A on everybody's printed agenda, the right-of-way abandonment for a portion of Old Dixie Highway. Mr. Costello, come on down.
Come on down.
Good evening, board, chair, everybody. How's everybody?
Fantastic.
Good, good.
Ms. Dassery? Take your time.
Well,
Chair, while that's
I'll
loading to
I'll
ex parte.
present.
Yes,
Yeah.
perfect, thank you. And I can start over here with Mr. Zeller. Any ex parte on this item, Mr. Zeller?
Other than visiting the site driving past it almost daily, I have had none.
Ms. Snyder?
Yeah, visited the site.
Mr. Brown?
I spoke with Mr. Costello.
Great. Ms.
None for me.
Blankenship? Ms. Morrison?
Yeah, I know this site and I talked to Jeff Costello.
Same for me.
I drive past the site frequently, have not in the past week, and Mr. Costello called me today, but I apologize, I did not have time to get back to you.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Good evening. Item 8A, the abandonment of the right-of-way of 2410 North Federal Highway, file 2023-161, and Rizal Rodriguez for Development Services.
Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez. Mr. Costello, the floor is yours.
Well, the presentation's coming. Jeff Costello, JC Planning Solutions, representing 2410 Federal LLC. It's a very brief presentation. I can probably talk through it if you want me to.
We like brief.
Like your staff's presentation, go through it. But anyway,
We're patient. We can
We're
wait.
patient. We can wait.
you have 2
We can wait,
minutes.
staff.
Hopefully just take
Come back with a stun drive. Let's see, if it takes more than a minute, take a break.
Presentation from the applicant's not in the computer. I think that's how Rebecca run to go get.
Probably go get a thumb drive.
There she is.
Here we go.
We're working on it. When we copied all the files over to the drive, this one didn't copy for some reason, so you have to be plugged into the network, so we're working on it.
Okay, would you like us to recess for a minute or two, or should we move on to another item and come right back to this?
If we could skip this item, I apologize, Mr. Costello. We could go to the 24.
We can move on
I'm
to
sorry, to
Mr.
the
Schiller's
1201.
item 8C.
Yes, we could do that.
Sorry,
could've
you're in the
talked you
batter's
through it.
box
Could've talked
again,
you through
Mr.
it.
Costello.
We want you to be able to do your presentation.
We're moving you into,
I
right.
appreciate
Mr. Schiller, good things come to those who wait.
Exactly. So, Chair, just because we formally called that item,
Yes.
if somebody just says so moved, but just a motion to postpone item 8B to 8C and make 8C 8B.
So moved.
So moved. Second motion by Ms. Morrison, second by Ms. Blankenship. Ms. Miller, could you just call the roll quickly?
Gregory Snyder,
Yes.
Christina Morrison.
Yes.
Alan Zeller,
Yes.
Joy Howell.
Yes.
Chris Brown. Julian Blankenship.
Yes.
Chris Davy.
Yes. Let the record show 8C became 8A. It's by a vote of 7-0. Go ahead, Mr. Schiller.
Excellent. Thank you. Oh, go ahead.
Ms. Dossary?
Introducing item 8C,
Please.
1201 George Bush Boulevard, file number 2023-60.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez.
Excellent. Good evening, Board. My name is Neil Schiller with Government
Excuse me,
Law Group.
1 second. Mr. Schiller, sorry.
That's okay.
Ex parte communication I did not do on this item. We did it on the last. Mr. Zeller.
So I visited the site, I read Mr. Schiller's email to the server that was on the Delray server, and I answered Mr. Schiller's email that I was unfortunately unable to attend the Zoom conference call since I was out of town till today.
Okay. Mr. Snyder?
Yeah, I visited the site and I did a Zoom conversation with Mr. Schiller and Mr. McAllister.
Wonderful. Mr. Brown?
I've visited with Mr. Schiller and I've visited with the applicant.
None.
Ms. Morrison?
Yes, I know the site very well, and I talked with the developer and Mr. Schiller.
Great. Ms. Howell?
Email communication with Mr. Schiller, and I do know the site. Thank you.
I know the site, and I had a Zoom call with Mr. Schiller and the representative of the applicant.
Awesome.
Sorry,
Thank you.
Mr. Schiller.
Not at all.
Last
Not at all.
interruption.
Thank you. All the legalities are important. That's why I'm here. So good evening again. Neil Schiller with Government Law Group. I'm here tonight representing STOM Development Group, and I'm fortunate enough to have my client with us tonight in attendance, not just to answer questions, but to very briefly introduce STOM Development Group and himself.
Good evening, everyone. Just want to say thanks for everybody being here tonight. Appreciate you taking the time to hear us out on 1201 George Bush Boulevard. As Neil mentioned, my name is Sean McAllister on behalf of STOM Development Group, or commonly referred to as SDG, as you can see on the screen there. I think briefly just wanted to say, Delray has kind of become like a second home for myself and my team over the last 2.5 to 3 years. I've really, kind of loved our experience here, and just kind of look forward to continuing working through great projects. This one included, which I'll kind of let Neil get into, 1201 George Bush. Thanks, everybody.
Great. Thank
Thank
you,
you
Mr.
so much, Sean. So we're here tonight on a rezoning request to go from residential office to residential medium or medium residential. We're proposing 3 townhomes on the site. The site is located on the corner of Andrews Avenue and George Bush Boulevard. It's 0.4 acres, so it's not a very large site, and the FAR is proposed to be just under 1.0. And our use is consistent with the existing development pattern. I'll get into that. Here's the zoning map of the city. We are in front of the Planning and Zoning Board. So I wanted to show you exactly where the property was. It's that O, right in RO. And as you can see, it's literally surrounded except for the west side in RM. So that we're seeking to go to that gold color RM zoning district. This is an aerial of the site that we pulled from Google Earth, and I think it really shows well the block and the development pattern of the block, which is overwhelmingly multifamily residential. And as you can see, this is somebody mentioned a prominent corner or drive-by on George Bush Boulevard, and we'll show you why, again, we think that this site is perfect for the 3 townhomes that we're seeking to develop. So reasons for rezoning, you have a lot of standards when you go for rezoning. We feel that there has been a change in circumstance which makes this current zoning inappropriate. The current RO zoning allows for a mix of commercial and residential that are much more intense than the uses allowed in RM zoning. And then there's a significant demand much higher demand for residential than there is commercial office. The market has changed since COVID. People are still working from home. And in fact, my son, who will hopefully be part of a new working generation soon, the newer generations are demanding to work from home and to have flexibility in where they work. They're not going into the office every day, every week, as they were in my generation. And again, the other criteria on the reasons for rezoning is whether or not the requested zoning is of a similar intensity under the future land use map, which again, I think we showed you pretty convincingly already that the proposed RM zoning is identical to the adjacent properties. And it's a little bit less intense, actually a little bit more or less intense than the RO zoning. In fact, it results in a net decrease of 36 trips when you go from office to residential. You have required findings, as you know, 3.1.1. First is consistency with the land use map. The land use map for this property is transitional, TRN. And as you can see, for the table right from the Always Delray Comprehensive Plan, RM is a compatible zoning district. And again, we're asking for 3 townhomes, which is permitted in RM zoning, just not permitted in RO zoning. RO only allows single-family homes and duplexes. Concurrency. These are the criteria: traffic, schools, water, sewer, solid waste, and drainage, all of which have sufficient capacity for this project. The net decrease of 36 trips, again, is in our traffic statement and is confirmed by Palm Beach County Traffic Division. Consistency with the comprehensive plan. There are just 2 examples. I have more in our application and our justification statement, but these are 2 examples of consistency with the Always Delray Comprehensive Plan. I'm not going to read them to you. And then compliance of the LDRs. Again, we will comply with all of the land development regulations. This is a Class 5 site plan approval, so we have to go back through to the SPRAB board for a Class 5 site plan approval application, as well as a major plat, which will go to the commission. So rezoning standards, 3.2.2. Is this the most restrictive residential zoning district that is applicable given the existing development pattern? We think RM is the most restrictive. Again, it's more restrictive and less intense than the RO zoning, and it's surrounded by RM zoning. B and C aren't applicable to this application. They deal with land west of 95 and commercial development, but D is. Rezoning of the land shall result in allowing land uses deemed compatible with adjacent and nearby land uses. Again, it's surrounded almost by RM zoning, and the whole block is multifamily residential, or would be if this were to be approved. Lastly, E, remaining infill lots within the coastal high hazard area shall be developed using zoning which is identical or similar to the zoning of adjacent properties. Again, this property is surrounded on the whole block to RM zoning, which is identical to the zoning that we're seeking. And this is a excerpt from the traffic study which shows a net decrease of daily trips when you rezone from office and commercial to residential, especially with the amount of units that we're seeking. We did have some beautiful pictures that we know are not, you're not allowed to make a decision on, so staff graciously took them out for us, and thank you. Again, the application meets all the LDR criteria for approval. RM is less intense than the existing RO zoning, which takes some trips off the barrier island, especially in emergency situations. Multifamily residential is the prevailing use. We have a beautiful staff report, and I want to thank your staff for being great to work with and really vetting this project. We have a lot of comments that we just resubmitted on or we're about to be resubmitting on. So we're moving this project forward, and we hope you will help us by voting to approve tonight. Thank you very much, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Schiller. Ms. Rodriguez, Ms. Dossary.
Good evening. We're going to advance the first slides. The application location is the north side of George Bush Boulevard and Andrews Avenue. It's a 0.4 acre site. The current zoning is residential office. The land use is transitional, and the current land use has been in place since 1994. What occupies the area now is a 3,984 square foot vacant office building that was built in 1979. Next slide, please. This is the current zoning to your left, the proposed zoning to your right. As you can see, all of the parcels to the north, the east, the south, and the northwest are RM zoning. Findings that must be made, you will, as the board, request a recommendation. If your recommendation is not to move forward, this application will not move forward to the commission. Valid reasons for approving a zoning change in 2.4.5. The zoning has previously changed or was issued in error. There's been a change in circumstance, or the zoning is of similar intensity as allowed under the future land use. The proposed zoning of RM may be more appropriate for the property because the surrounding development is primarily RM to the north, south, and east. Multifamily residential use is more intense than the residential uses in RO zoning, which permits single-family detached dwellings and duplex structures. However, RO allows certain other more intense uses, such as funeral homes, NEV sales or leasing centers, offices, child and adult daycare, or bed and breakfast. Next slide. This is a comparison of the RO and RM uses from your staff report that provides an illustration of what we're talking about. Next slide. The required findings of section 3.1.1 are that we have to meet land use, concurrency, consistency, and compliance with the LDRs. The land use is transitional. The existing zoning district is RO, and the applicant is proposing to rezone to RM, which is a district within the TRN. Let me back up a moment. It's important to note that in transitional land use, the maximum FAR is 1.0 for the site. Whether it's RO or RM, you can't exceed a 1.0 FAR in density. Concurrency. The traffic standards review shows that there are 6 fewer morning trips and 8 fewer evening trips at peak hours. There is water and sewer infrastructure sufficiently for the project. The drainage review will be made during the site plan review process. Solid waste and schools have sufficient capacity for the project. Policies that are applicable I call your attention to 1.2, NDC 1.2, which is to apply low-density residential and medium-density residential land uses to maintain and enhance the city's neighborhood character. Also, Housing Policy 1.1.8 is to accommodate densities in established residential areas that promote compatibility with prevailing neighborhood character. Next slide, please. Compliance with the LDRs. This will be subject to a site plan review process for the LDRs and will go before the Site Plan Review and Appearance Board. The RM zoning district also provides additional standards and special regulations because they want to ensure compatibility with existing residential uses. Next slide. Those performance standards specifically in the RM district deal with traffic circulation, building placement, the relationship of the buildings and the heights next to lower density districts, whether they have varied streetscape and building design, to the types of unit sizes and floor plan variety they may be offering, and they will provide open space and native habitat. Also, access to available transit and a pedestrian network. These are all items that will be looked at and reviewed in addition to your standard items for plan review because of this district. Next slide. Standards for site plan action. That the design doesn't impact visibility to traffic, provides interconnections, has open space and recreational enhancements. Development has to be consistent with adjacent development regardless of zoning designation, and the development shall not exceed the maximum limits established in table NDC 1, which limits the land use intensity to an FAR 1.0. Next slide, please. Standards for rezoning actions. The most restrictive zoning district that is applicable. In this case, the district RM matches the existing development on 3 sides of the parcel. B is not applicable. We're not dealing with automotive commercial. C is not applicable because we're not dealing with commercial development. Next slide. The rezoning shall result in allowing land uses compatible with adjacent property. The table of land use comparisons and zoning districts is from your staff report, which shows that medium density residential surrounds the parcel and the RO parcel next door. And for the RO zoning comparison, the 4.4.6I standards will help shelter that parcel. Next slide. Standards for rezoning actions. The remaining infill lots on the coastal high hazard area should be developed with zoning that is identical or similar. This parcel is within the high hazard area, and the proposed zoning is identical to adjacent properties to the north, south, and east. The proposed development is of similar density and intensity to the area. Next slide. For board consideration, whether 3 units on a 0.4 acre parcel yielding a density of 7.5 units per acre is the FAR limitation from the TRN land use sufficient to regulate the bulk of the proposed development? Are the regulations in the LDR sufficient to mitigate any potential negative impact of rezoning? And the Site Plan Review and Appearance Board will review the Class 5 site plan, and a major plat will come back before this board subsequent to STAP's PRAG review. Next slide. These are the options for board action.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez. Thank you. I can now ask Mr. Schiller. We can public comment?
Yep.
That's what I was just going to say. Is there any member of the public here this evening who wishes to speak on this item? If it is, now's your time to approach the podium. So, seeing no one rising, public comment can be closed on this item. And I can then ask Mr. Schiller, do you have any cross-examination or rebuttal for the city?
No cross-examination, no rebuttal, just please approve. Thank you.
You got it, Ms. Schiller. Ms. Dassery, I'm going to ask you and Ms. Rodriguez the same question. None for you? Perfect. We can now move into board discussion, and I'll turn to my colleagues. Ms. Morrison, since I started with Mr. Zeller last time, we'll start with you this time.
Thank you very much. I think this use is far more appropriate than an office building on the island. It's surrounded by the same type of uses, and I'm in full recommendation. Thank you.
Great. Ms. Howell?
I concur completely. I think it'll actually be an improvement to the neighborhood.
Ms. Howe? Ms. Blankenship?
Same.
Mr. Brown?
Concur with Ms. Morrison.
I concur with all of that, but I do have something to say.
Please.
The staff report mentions here in the back that they're putting 3 units on 0.4 of an acre. That's a 7.5 density.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't we make it RM8 in view of the most restrictive zoning that's applicable?
I don't know that that's necessary, but I'll defer to
Yeah.
Mr. Bennett.
No, I don't think the board could change the zoning that's being requested. You could find that it's not the most restrictive and vote to deny based on that, but
Oh, this is, I'm sorry, I misunderstood the application of the 8 to the thing. It actually is a different zoning.
Correct. It's just RM.
Forget
It's
it.
RM.
Forget
Okay,
it.
perfect. You got it. Mr. Zeller?
So you did say these are going to front on Andrews and not on George Bush, right?
That is correct.
Okay. And the height and all the other bulk standards are going to be met?
Yes,
They have
sir.
to meet
Not
all the
exceeded.
RM zoning. They have to meet all the standards of RM zoning, 35 feet in height, et cetera, setbacks, et cetera.
just a reminder, if you approve the zoning, may not be this applicant, it could be the next one, but they can seek waivers and those types of things. So
Right.
really just focus on.
But we're not granting them the zoning. All we're doing is
Correct.
granting the zoning tonight.
No, I get that, but I feel more comfortable to hear it on the record for the next time when they come in for the waivers and wanting to build kitchens on top of the roofs and things such as that.
If it pleases the chair, Mr. Zeller, I don't think we have any waivers proposed.
No.
Well, not at this hearing, but I don't think as part of our response to the TAC comments, I don't think we're proposing any waivers. That gives you any comfort.
Okay, thank you.
No
No,
variances.
there's not. Okay.
I'm fine.
Okay. I want to say that I'm glad to support this too, in candor. I wish you'd get a 4th unit there to be a better rateable for the city. Okay, but unfortunately, it's a corner piece of property,
Right.
and we have setbacks.
Yes.
But no, I want to say I think it's a great project. I think much like Seaside Builders in here a couple of years ago on the Special Activities District, where they went from an office building to essentially the same type of zoning as you're requesting here. It's a great move for the neighborhood, and it's a great move for the city. So with that, I would turn to my colleagues and just ask for a motion. Anybody?
I'd like to request a motion of approval.
Okay.
Well, we gotta read the.
You have to read the statement up there. Go ahead.
No, you read.
Come on.
Sorry. Move a recommendation of approval of ordinance number 30-23, a privately initiated request to rezone the property located at 1201 George Bush Boulevard from residential office to medium-density residential, finding that the amendment and approval thereof is consistent with the comprehensive plan and meets the applicable criteria set forth in the land development regulations. I said that in my best Philadelphia accent, in honor of Mr. McAllister, my fellow Philadelphian.
Ms. Morrison, and I second that.
Thank you.
Ms. Miller, if you could, motion by Ms. Morrison, second by Mr. Brown, call the roll.
Gregory Snyder,
Yes.
Christina Morrison,
Yes.
Alan Zeller,
Yes.
Joy Howell,
Yes.
Chris Brown,
Yes.
Julian Blankenship,
Yes.
Chris Davy.
Yes, let the record show that item passed 7-0.
Thank you
Good
so
luck,
much.
Ms. Schiller.
Thank
And
you.
I want to tell you, in the future, I heard there's a 5-second rule in this city. If you want to show a picture of a project, we just asked Mr. Bennett. We just asked Mr. Bennett to cover his eyes for 5 seconds.
That subliminal subconscious thing.
Noted. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Mr. Costello, sorry to put you back.
So, Chair, before we move forward with Mr. Costello,
Yes.
I
That
think
is not
that
a
the
rule you're gonna tell me?
No, I think the CIP item that we had is an ordinance and needs actually a recommendation of approval, which unfortunately was not in the formally in the language.
Okay.
So if I can just get a motion to reopen item 8A.
So moved.
So moved. A motion by Ms. Blankenship.
Second.
By Ms. Howell. Ms. Miller, if you could please call the roll that we could reopen item 8A.
So
Gregory
we-
Snyder,
Yes.
Christina Morrison,
Yes.
Alan Zeller,
Yes.
Joy Howell,
Yes.
Chris Brown,
Yes.
Julian Blankenship,
Yes.
Chris Davy.
Yes, let the record show we're reopening item 8A by a vote of 7-0.
And since the board already made a finding that it's consistent, just a simple motion to recommend approval of ordinance 29-23. It's
Motion
so
to
moved, it's
represent
fine.
approval of ordinance 29-23.
Proposed ordinance 29-23.
Second.
Great. Motion by Ms. Blankenship, second by Ms. Morrison. Ms. Miller, if you could please call the roll.
Gregory Snyder,
Yes.
Christina Morrison,
Yes.
Alan Zeller,
Yes.
Joy Howell,
Yes.
Chris Brown,
Yes.
Julian Blankenship,
Yes.
Chris Davy.
Yes, let the record show the recommendation passed 7-0.
Original motion.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Mr. Costello,
Good evening again.
I'll let Ms.
All right.
Rodriguez read the item into the agenda again, and then the floor is yours.
Introducing the abandonment of the right-of-way for 2410 North Federal Highway, file 2023-161.
Thank you. Good
Thank you,
evening,
Mr. Costello.
Board. Jeff Costello, JC Planning Solutions, representing 2410 Federal LLC, regarding the property at 2410 North Federal Highway. This is just a location, the former Ellie's Diner restaurant. And this portion we're talking about is just to, the area we're talking about is right there highlighted. And so just a couple photos of the area along Dixie, not much to the unimproved portion of the right-of-way adjacent to the property, and then some surrounding properties to the north, the east, of course, is Ellie's, former Ellie's, and then the west is a soccer complex, and to the south, the boxing gym. Some background, the right-of-way was platted in 1946 as an 80-foot right-of-way, and the city has abandoned its interest in the past for a number of abandonment requests along Dixie Highway, primarily to the east 20 feet, reducing it from 80 feet to 60 feet. You can see in blue are those areas, and highlighted is the area in question right there. And it's about a little over 4,000 square feet, 20 by lot 202, and basically it's going to be incorporated into redevelopment of the property for a multifamily development. Zoning is GC, land use map amendment. GC, it's in the North Federal Highway overlay. Within that 28-foot area, there are existing utilities, 8-inch sewer main, city sewer main, as well as an AT&T duct bank. Highlight on the screen, we are providing a 20-foot utility easement over the area to be abandoned. So there's no relocation of utilities. End up being in, once the plan's all developed, landscaping for the most part and driveway access. Consistency with the comp plan is noted in the staff report. This particular section of Dixie falls within this portion where it's only maximum right-of-way with the ultimate is 50 feet. We're proposing 60 to be consistent with all the other abandonments that occurred in that stretch. North Federal Highway redevelopment plan indicates a 50-foot cross section with actually on-street parking on the east side, and so we'll see how that all develops in the future. And then there's the neighborhood districts and corridors element. The existing street network and connectivity will be maintained. Positive findings can be made with 246 M5A through C. Again, the ultimate right-of-way is 50 feet. This will be abandonment of only 20 feet. Proved consistent with the other properties to the north and south, 20-foot general utility easement and maintaining connectivity. And with that, appreciate recommendation of approval, and I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Costello. Ms. Rodriguez, Ms. Dassery.
Okay. Item 8A. Next slide. The request is to abandon 20 feet along Old Dixie Highway on the east side. The land use is general commercial and the zoning is general commercial. Next slide. The street network classification improvements do note that this is a 50-foot right-of-way in the comprehensive plan. As platted, Old Dixie Highway is 80 feet. The portion is classified as a local road, and abandoning 20 feet would leave 60 feet of dedicated right-of-way, which is more than the comprehensive plan accounts for. The findings in 3.1.1, there is no change in land use. The concurrency is if approved, the general utility easement would be required to consummate the abandonment so that access to utility services in the area will not be abandoned. They'll be worked on. And for example, the owner has agreed to pay for relocation in the future of any AT&T utilities in there. Consistency, the policy is not to grant abandonment of right-of-way, but there is not a conclusive need that they'll need 80 feet of right-of-way, and they have already granted 14 portions of that roadway to be abandoned. So those numerous instances lead to us to say that it does not violate the comp plan. This is an example for you. Next slide. This is the red arrows indicate all of the areas on the plat that have been abandoned already provided, and the 2410 North Federal Highway is almost in the middle of that grouping of abandonments. Next page. The LDR section findings for an abandonment is that there is not nor will be a need for the use of the right-of-way. The ultimate right-of-way is 50 feet. Therefore, it leaves 60 feet for public purpose. The abandonment does not prevent access to another lot of record. It doesn't because it's adjacent to the lot that's going to be receiving it. And the abandonment will not result in a detriment to the provision of access. The GUE will ensure that we have service area. The city engineer, part of the procedure is that the city engineer make a recommendation. He has recommended approval of the abandonment because it's consistent with past abandonments. It's not going to prevent access to a lot of record, and access for city and public utility services are required. The GUE will take care of that. Next slide. These are recommendations for board action.
Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez. Appreciate it. Is any member of the public here? We're going to open this item up to public comment. Is there any member of the public who wishes to come forward and speak on this item? Now is your time to rise. Seeing no one rising and coming forward, public comment on this item is closed. And I would then turn to Mr. Costello and ask any cross-examination or rebuttal of the city. And I will ask the city the same. And they've declined as well. No cross-examination or rebuttal. So I'll turn it over to my colleagues.
Chair,
and
one thing very quickly. Mr. Costello, we did the ex parte disclosure when it first got called. Do you want them to disclose again, or you remember the disclosures when it was originally called?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, I'm
great.
fine with it.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. I was actually thinking about that myself, that we disclosed ex parte communication about a half an hour ago. But it is on tape if someone wants to hear it. Mr. Zeller, we're going to start at your end this time.
Start?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So I have a couple of questions. So this is proposed, this is the Bee's Knees site.
Yes.
Right, current site. They didn't last very long. But they're proposing multifamily, is that what they're proposing?
We haven't applied
No.
yet. We will eventually, and, but the amendment will be incorporated into the property at 2410 for redevelopment.
So is there any indication about how many multifamily units?
No, the maximum density is 12 units to the acre in that location, so.
Yeah, what we have before us,
So it's for just-
Mr. Zeller, we got
I know
what
it's
we
not
have before
before
us, I can already see Mr.
I
Bennett leaning forward.
If we get to
Okay.
that point, there'll be a conditional use for a freestanding multifamily
So
developed before you.
I've long had concerns about the city giving away land such as this, existing land. So I have some ancillary questions. So for example, assuming that they do multifamily, are they going to include affordable housing?
So
No,
I really
thank you.
don't.
Yeah.
I don't.
Mr. Zeller, I mean, come on.
You know, the findings are whether there is not nor will there
Thank
be
you.
a need for the use. The abandonment does not nor will not prevent access, and it will not result in the detriment of the provision of access or utility services. So really, the question should be pointed to those three findings.
Yeah. Are you going to cut AT&T's lines?
I get it. The problem is with the order of these applications when they come in, because we get stymied in the end. So assuming this is going to be multifamily.
That's a big
And it may
assumption
not
we
be.
can't make
I
here, but we can't
understand
make that assumption.
And since the state statutes require that the city give the developer some type of an incentive to include affordable housing in their site, giving away land is an incentive. But here we're giving away land without knowing what is going to be.
That would really be a text amendment
No.
to allow the city to abandon right-of-way
Right.
in exchange for workforce housing, and
What
that's
we don't
not,
do.
that's just not the way the current code is written, so
Right.
that might be a discussion at the end during board comments about incentives to provide for workforce housing, but that's not, unfortunately, that's not part of the discussion today.
Mr.
I
Vice Mayor, Mr.
understand.
Chair, may I? To
But
your
you do
point.
get my point.
To your point. So the way the ordinances, the LDRs are written, this property, whoever platted it back in 1946, dedicated the right-of-way to the city. Nobody acquired right-of-way. So it was dedicated, at that time, it's probably the county, Old Dixie Highway. It was under county jurisdiction. So, and in the plat, and also there's a statement under the dedication that reverts, if abandoned, reverts back
To the property
adjacent-
owner.
To the property owner.
Right.
So that's in the dedication. But I'm just to clarify, not all situations should be looked at as though the property's being, it's like giving it for free. It came from a property and it's being abandoned and reverts back
Can
to
I
the property.
interject here? Excuse me, Mr. Costello.
That's
Mr. Zeller, what I'll say is, we recently had the project over there at the corner of Lake, at the southwest corner of Swinton and Lake Ida, where the county required, I believe, some insane right-of-way, 110 feet or something like that, at that intersection. And the developer chose not to challenge it to the county because, but I think all of us sitting here would say, we don't envision Lake Ida Road right west of Swinton being widened to a width of 110 or 115 feet. In this particular instance, the city's given back 14 other portions of the right-of-way in this
I
strip.
understand.
Okay? And the utilities are still going to retain a utility easement through this area, okay? The city engineer has found that we only need 50 feet, but there's going to be 60 feet remaining. So this isn't providing some extraordinary benefit to the owner or subsequent owner of this property. Like in other instances where people come in and say, we just want to abandon the alley and we're taking away some future connector or something like that. That isn't the case. This isn't affecting any other lot other than this one lot. Excuse me, Ms. Dossary, I see you leaning forward. Please.
Just to Mr. Costello's point, this land, the easement, is not currently owned by the city. It is
Owned by the property owner.
owned by the property owner, so it's just removing the right that the city or whatever the owner of the road has. I think it's whichever
To be able to construct
use
something.
their own property again because that need is no longer there.
Is that fair, Mr. Bennett?
No, I think that discussion's right on point. You know, the land was never given to the city. The city was given the right to use the land.
It was a right of way.
And we're still letting them have an easement on that land.
Right. And the property owner is still allowing the utilities to have an easement across that property. So, Mr. Zeller, anything else?
I understand the limitations.
Right. I understand your gripe, but I don't think this particular project is fair to make the gripe on, is what I'm saying.
So I'll reserve my insistence that these projects at a later time address the needs of the city as well, as opposed to just the needs of the property owner.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Zeller. Mr. Snyder.
Yeah, at this point, having heard all that, it sounds fine to me. Let's go.
You got it, Mr. Snyder. Mr. Brown.
Mr. Costello, you showed a cross-section of the right-of-way. I commend you for the cross-section for having a parking on the east side of the, that would be really part of that easement. Is that correct?
No, that would actually be in the public.
That's a future
right-of-way.
plan.
That's a future.
But not within the easement area.
I wouldn't hold my breath on seeing it.
I'd like to make a statement, Mr. Chairman, because I live in the world of redevelopment. Don't count out Dixie as not being redeveloped. Maybe I may not be here, you may not be here, but it will happen eventually, and we need on-street parking, particularly for guest parking, for that multifamily project, if that's what it's going to be.
I think that was a
Point
city from the
taken.
comprehensive plan, wasn't it? The drawing.
The second thing I'd like to make a statement is the sidewalk that's currently there, and you showed a picture of sidewalk. Is the sidewalk going to stay, is it going to be built exactly where it is? Are they all going to connect together?
They're going to connect.
They're not going to go westward.
They're going to connect, and it would be within the right-of-way. It would be at the west edge of that 20-foot. So I'm not sure exactly where that sidewalk is in relation to the abandonment, but it's right on the edge, I think. So
On the edge of the 80-foot.
but it'll continue. No, that to the south, they abandoned it. They had a 20-foot abandonment, and there's a 20-foot utility easement there. The sidewalk, I believe, is on the east edge of that 60 feet. I believe.
Okay.
So, but in any case, however it is laid out,
There will be connectivity.
Will be connected.
It will be connected. It
Yes.
doesn't look like that when you drive out there. I drove out there.
It does seem kind, and then the fences, yeah, there's a kind of nuances out there.
Stick around and make sure
Yes, sir.
right. Thank you.
Mr. Brown, Ms. Blankenship,
I'm in favor.
Ms. Howell,
I'm in favor.
Ms. Morrison.
Just a note, I would like to remind the board that this property today, in August of 2023, is zoned general commercial. So we're dealing with a general commercially zoned property.
Correct.
And just another point, I don't understand how we've already given this same easement to 14 other properties adjoining this property and why it has to come before us to get this done. It just seems like it's superfluous.
We haven't given it to 14, well, the city's given it to 14 other property owners, but not all of them are contiguous to this property. Like the property immediately to the north of this property hasn't had the abandonment considered. That's a future customer for Mr. Costello.
And he'll be here next week to do the exact same thing that has already been done. So obviously I'm in favor of this,
Right.
but it just seems superfluous. It has to come before us to get it done.
For every
when it's
different
already been-
property owner.
Yeah.
The next item will be amendment of Chapter 2, and you'll be able
Thank
to
you.
talk about it then.
Yeah, good
You
point.
got it. Well, hearing that, I think we're all ready for a motion.
I'll make a motion.
Please.
Move a recommendation of approval to the City Commission regarding a privately initiated request to abandon a portion of a city-owned right-of-way, Old Dixie Highway, totaling approximately 4,049.6 square feet and located adjacent to 2410 North Federal Highway, by adopting the findings of fact and law contained in the staff report and finding that the request and approval thereof is consistent with the comprehensive plan and meets the criteria set forth in section 2.4.6 M5 of the Land Development Regulations.
Second?
Second.
Motion, let the record show, motion by Ms. Howell, second by Mr. Snyder. Ms. Miller, if you could please call the roll.
Gregory Snyder,
Yes.
Christina Morrison,
Yes.
Alan Zeller,
Yes.
Joy Howell,
Yes.
Chris Brown,
Yes.
Julian Blankenship,
Yes.
Chris Davy.
Yes. Let the record show, item number 8B, I believe it became. Is that correct? 8B, right-of-way abandonment for a portion of Old Dixie Highway, file number 2023161, passed 7-0.
Thank you very
Good luck,
much.
Mr.
Appreciate it.
Costello.
Thanks to staff for everything.
And we roll on into the item that never changed. 9B.
Those ladies weren't sworn in.
The only one that's
The only one that didn't change.
Oh, it doesn't matter? Okay.
But I know Anthea was sworn in. I think Anthea-
Was she? I didn't think she was here when they did
Yeah, I
it.
think she was.
Oh, okay. Doesn't matter. If it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter.
Like it's the dream team. We haven't seen you two together in a while.
Aw, that's nice. Thank
Sorry
you,
to make you
Julian.
wait so long.
So you didn't read all 200 pages to see why you haven't seen us? Okay, so, all right, so this is a lot of material. So I'm going to do my best just to give sort of an overview of what we're trying to accomplish, and then I think we're going to have to navigate possibly using page numbers and however you want to try to tackle this. What's before you today are 3 ordinances that a recommendation to amend the LDRs, is requested from this board. Ordinance 3123 is a complete repeal and replacement of Chapter 2, which contains all of the administrative provisions. And the reason that it's not a strike through and underline and a repeal and replace is because we were trying to reorder it into something that represented a more clear hierarchy of how development proceeds. We also had a lot of overlap between the different the current sections. There were findings that were in different parts of the LDR that should have been in Chapter 2. There were regulations in Chapter 2 that really should have been in other parts. So that's why what should have been, I think, which the commission was anticipating would be 1 ordinance is coming to you in 3 ordinances, because we just kept, the code we kept calling it like an octopus with tentacles. Like every time we thought we found it all, we couldn't. So 3123 is a complete repeal and replace. 3223 is moving through Chapter 4, which are the zoning regulations, where some of those standards or processes were duplicated or were hidden in one zone and should have been in another. And then 3323 amends the performance standards, because that's the right place to put some of the performance standards we found. And then there was a standard about both bus shelters and transportation demand management strategies that belonged actually in infrastructure. So the last one is the smallest ordinance. But I sort of wanted to kind of remind everyone, and most of you saw some of this in your board training, but the way that a development application moves through the city is that rezonings, specific questions, and large-scale projects are required to have a pre-application meeting prior to submitting. We just have found that everything goes much smoother for both the applicant and staff if before you bring in your application, we've had a conversation about what you're trying to build. There's intake meetings to ensure that an application is complete. Rochelle and Peter, and then historic, I think Michelle Hewitt and Katharina all do intake to make sure that there are complete applications. A staff planner is assigned once a complete application comes in. There is a period of sufficiency where we're looking through it to make sure everything is accurate, but honestly, with the screening that's happening at the intake meeting, it's few and far between that something is like not included. It does happen occasionally, but so with the complete, accurate application with a planner to sort of be the project manager moving it through, the first step that happens with all development is it goes to Technical Advisory Committee. Technical Advisory Committee has not only the planner that is assigned, it has a representative from the building department who's looking at it, the utilities department is looking at it, fire, police do a SEPTED review of the proposed arrangement. That's come up occasionally in site plan review. Engineering is checking not only rights of way, but drainage calculations and other things related to that. And then depending on what's happening with the property, we do have outside agencies that are looped into the review as well. If your property is located adjacent to a canal, Lake Worth Drainage District has a representative on TAC that reviews those things for impacts. FP&L has somebody that also participates and provides comments. So there's a full technical review, not just planning. All the departments are in TAC. So usually TAC, it's every Friday. Most reviews are given 2 weeks, but if you're bringing in Sunday Village and it's 4 blocks across the city, it's going to take a little longer because it's huge, right? Every comment by every department is written down. The applicant receives a written list of comments as to which LDR amendment you are not in compliance with, or considerations. Sometimes we just make suggestions that are optional. That does happen. But ultimately, there is a written list of comments. The planner makes sure everybody's FD, PD's, engineering, everybody's comments are collected together. Mind you, this part of the review, while building permit is fully on e-plans, planning is not. So we are still collecting PD. Actually, William is on TAC as well. We have a legal person in the room as well. So we get written comments. The planner compiles them, checking for any conflicts. We don't want the planner saying bring the building to the street and engineering say back the building up because there's a conflict. So we try to make sure one city, one set of comments that is not conflicting goes to the applicant. The next step is for the applicant to resubmit. Some applications resubmit within 2 weeks. Some never come back at all. Some come 5 months later when we thought they were not coming back at all. So they are to provide revised plans, and then that same list of comments, they're required to give us a response as to how each comment was addressed. And what I tell applicants is you can respond noted, or you can respond the setback was corrected on sheet A21. It depends on if you want to leave us breadcrumbs or you want us to play Where's Waldo. And we will go faster with one game versus another. You can leave the breadcrumbs very clearly for the record. So at any rate, when they come back in, it goes back through TAC again. TAC, each reviewer is making sure their comments were addressed, and they're making sure that you didn't break a different rule when you fix something, because that happens, right? You can't put your AC unit in the front setback and then they move it too far out of the side setback and it has to come in. This system continues until either all the comments are addressed or you have filed for a waiver or relief or you've decided to solve your idea a different way. So that's at that point is when a project is scheduled for a board hearing. There are advisory boards in play. If you're within the boundary of the Downtown Development Authority, the projects are forwarded there. If you're in the boundary of the CRA director is made aware of the project. There's different advisory committees that it might move through. So 3 weeks prior to the planning board, the staff report has to be drafted. 2 weeks prior to the meeting, everything is being reviewed. And mailings and advertising is happening because it depends on the application. Sometimes it's a 10-day mailer, sometimes it's a legal ad, things like that. And then the agenda and the package, for the benefit of those of you volunteering your time, needs to be up a week before so that there's enough time for you to participate in your role and around your own schedule. So we try to make sure that the board has at least 1 week to review the package. I know that this one actually went out Monday instead of the Friday before, because we try to give you the weekend. Most of you are working, you have other obligations, but and then ultimately there's board action. If it is a final board action, which this board doesn't see a lot that's final, you generally are giving recommendations to City Commission, and City Commission is taking final action. But for SPRAB and HPB, it's typically a final action, and anything that they decide goes on to what's called an appealable report. And if you're looking at the City Commission agendas, it's usually under Section 6, and it will give you a quick summary of all of the final action each board took, what the vote was, whether there were any comments outstanding, like it was 5-2, these two people dissented because they were concerned about something or else. And that allows the commission, if they're interested or they have any concerns, to reach down and they can appeal any decision that a lower board that has final action has made. They don't do it very often, but it's an important part of making sure that if the neighbors haven't found out about it soon enough to participate, then there's a way for them to be heard again. And if the commission appeals, then it's a de novo, meaning a brand new hearing at commission where we do this quasi-judicial decision all over again. And then also, what happens more frequently is the applicant doesn't agree with the final board decision and will appeal that, as is their right. They have to file that notice with the city clerk, and then they are to be heard within 60 days, I think, of receiving that. So this is kind of what everything goes through. And we are constantly, this is actually a screenshot of the rolling staff agenda. This team is constantly juggling all of these different board meetings to try to make sure everybody is moving through on the conveyor belt, being properly advertised. And some of them which require multiple hearings, like you can't go to this city commission meeting if this was your planning board meeting, because there's not enough time to actually get it on the agenda for the city clerk to be able to publish and have it fully reviewed. So this is kind of the way things are going. So the commission gave a directive to staff to figure out how to improve and streamline the review process. And there's a couple of ways that we're bringing this forward. One is to expand administrative authority beyond just single family and duplex building permits. And there's two ways that we're looking at doing that, and we'll give you examples. There is the individual staff action, like just submit for your building permit. But there's also the Development Services Management Group, which is established as part of the very beginning of how the structure of the city was going to be implemented. It was going to be implemented, I guess is the word, I don't know. And DSMG is required to, at the very least, have me, the building official, and the city engineer. The city manager has appointed, and it's always, since I've known it, had also the fire chief. It has the public works director, the utilities director, and the director of neighborhood and community services. So it's really your directors that are all have a hand in technical review of building and plans, or in the case of public works, is outright building projects as well. So the other thing that we're doing, and this is in a response, I think, both to an effort to streamline, but a lot of complaints that we hear from our boards, is to try to combine applications for a more holistic review under one board instead of splitting it amongst two. So for example, this board will hear a conditional use request for a density increase, and you will make a recommendation to commission. And you get shown lots of very pretty pictures, but it isn't the technical application that everything has been measured and checked and all of that. And then SPRAB gets the technical application for all that density that planning board and commission approved. And then it's like, oh, we need a landscape waiver because we can't fit all the parking, so then so it's like SPRAB can't say no because they've already been told they can have that number of units. And you might not have approved that number of units if you didn't know that it couldn't fit in the first place, right? So this has been an ongoing concern with the boards. I think it's harder for our residents to track what something is going to look like. Like they feel, that it's sort of like getting split through the middle. So we are trying, what's before you will have that more holistic review under one board by allowing concurrent review of site plans with conditional use requests. And then just density increases and height increases just using the regular performance standards and just having a different level site plan that cannot have final action at a lower board. All of those would come to this board for recommendation to commission. So just sort of taking SPRAB out of it so that you're looking at the whole plan with the increased height or density here, and then you're making a recommendation to City Commission. Rather than what we're doing now, which is conditional use recommendation, final action commission, SPRAB hears it over here, appealable report. We can actually move those 4 actions into 2 and have a better review of the proposed development by one board. So that's kind of a win-win, I think, for everyone. The other thing is that those density increases that we're talking about, those are incentives for something that we are on the record of saying we want. We need workforce housing, right? So if we are trying to streamline things like workforce housing, or we're trying to make it easier to have a historic property, we need to do what we can to make the process more simple for those efforts that we have said as a city we want to provide an incentive for. And so it's collapsing a few things there. And we'll go over a little bit of the details. And, we tried to figure out how not to make this so wordy. But so again, you have 3 ordinances. 3123 is the repeal and replacement of Chapter 2. 3223 addresses Chapter 4. It's removing a sort of old section that had to do about annexing rural land and giving it an initial ag zoning district. We never see that. We're not annexing ag land. It's just not heard of. So it's taking this section out that's sort of obsolete. Article 4.3 again is relocating and then adding performance standards for multifamily over into Chapter 2. We're, again, no longer calling the height increases or the density increases conditional uses. They're being categorized under their own type of site plan, so that language had to be taken out, the conditional use reference under every zoning district. And then we would take language out and then find it 2 other places, so we kept trying to make that more clear. And then again, all of those same conditional use for density or height was over in 4.7, and so it doesn't need to be there either under the new categorization. Okay, Chapter 3 is where all those performance standards landed, or, and I'm sorry, Chapter 3, which has the performance standards, is where the transportation demand management requirement is landing. So if you have a development of a certain size, you're supposed to do a TDM telling us how you're going to facilitate transportation of your employees or other things like that. And that really was more appropriate as a performance standard. And then we had requirements for bus shelters when you hit certain things, and for some reason they were in the process and not over in the infrastructure area. So that's a small shift, but trying to clean up as we go. I thought this would look bigger. I'm really sorry. Okay, so this is what the other issue is that the current language is not super clear. And I'm going to change these colors for the next meeting. So this is
Yeah, the dark blue.
The dark blue is not working at all. Okay.
Okay.
So, so right now we have 5 classes of site plans. We have class 1s, which are all administratively, no, they're not all administratively approved. I'm sorry, this is the problem with it. Walls, fences, slabs, dumpster enclosures, and sheds, which don't require board action. Okay, well, which ones require board action? You have to go look somewhere else to figure that out, which do not require board action, but if you're changing a facade, it does. So we're like, okay, but the class 1 has the same fee, because some of this helps with fee structure. A lot of what you're seeing here, if it goes to a board, is landing on what we've established for SPRAB is a consent agenda to just kind of try to move it through more quickly because they're simple. Class 2 is you're changing a site plan that isn't a class 1 change. And it does not require performance standards, but it does require board review. So then a class 3 is a modification that is a change of intensity of use. Notice it says change, it doesn't say increase. So just changing it takes you to a board. And then you do some of the performance standards. Nowhere have we determined which performance standards are the partial review. I guess we look at the ones that apply based on what the application is. Class 4, I gotta be honest with you, since Scott Poppy retired, I really have a hard time telling the difference between a 3 and a 4. He used to help me with that because significant is not defined anywhere in the code. What is a significant change, right? And then 5 is clear. 5's just a new build, like it's new building. We know you're tearing down the building, you're building a whole new building. That one was clear. And you get a full review of performance standards. So what we're bringing forward is trying to create, and this didn't work out right, something didn't this isn't the current, a new application for workforce housing right now. Let me see if I got this right. Goes from TAC, PZB for recommendation, City Commission for final action, SPRAB for the class 5, and then an appealable report. And mind you, this is where we find out we need waivers after this has been done here. So this is the new application that I was going through. TAC, you would look, PZB would now look at the site plan with the request for increased density, and Commission would look at the full site plan with the request for increased density. And because Commission is approving it, it no longer needs to wait a month on an appealable report. So, you know, we're hoping that this is a more holistic process also for our residents to understand what some of these conditional use requests in the past have been and what do they look like, right? So this is what the goal is, and you're going to see we've recategorized the levels of site plan review to absorb this action through a site plan with a drawing of what an actual building is going to look like that holds all of that. And so we think that this is doing a few things. It's we see the whole project. If it's not going to fit, the board that's giving you the density is going to be acting on the waivers too. So it's not bifurcated anymore. You see all of it. You're going to see the site plan. Here's how the building's laid out. Here's what it looks like. Here's all the units. Here's the waivers we need to do this great project. You'll make a recommendation to City Commission who'll take final action. It will be easier for the community, I think, to follow and participate in the approval process because they will be looking at a tangible result from the beginning. And it's more efficient for staff. It's fewer meetings to prep for, agendas, like that rolling, you know, agenda that we're always trying to track people and balance it so that it's not too hard on Commission or the boards. And it's a shorter review period for the applicants. These are the proposed levels that we're trying to achieve. A level 1, which is a truly administrative review for modifications to existing development. These would be modifications that meet all the LDRs. There is no increase in building area. We are not increasing the building area. We're not building more buildings. This is, we're changing our landscaping, hardscaping, architectural elevations, materials, and colors. Now, materials and colors and architectural wasn't administrative before. We don't see a lot of these turned down anyway, and usually it's because staff is pushing that something is off to us. That's why you're not on the consent agenda. You're over down here because we're worried. We would still have the ability to escalate up to SPRAB something if the applicant and staff are not agreeing. We think the color is garish. We think the materials are not consistent with the defined architectural style. Things like that. It could go up to a board if there was a problem, but otherwise it would be administratively reviewed. Then we go to new construction or additions to existing buildings that meet all the LDRs and all the performance standards through an analysis by staff, not just partial, all of them. For anybody building 5 units or less, or 15,000 gross square feet of non-residential or mixed use, would be, once it's through TAC and it's meeting all the LDRs, then it would go to an administrative approval, but it would still appear on an appealable report for the City Commission to be apprised of the new development. Level 3 is new constructions or existing buildings that are greater than 5 units, are more than 5,000 square feet of mixed use or non-residential. Of course, it has to have a full review. This would go to a board review, and right now the board would shift and it would be planning board to see all of the bigger scale development. So SPRAB would handle any waivers or landscape waivers, architectural resolution, if you're appealing the application of the BPOA design guidelines, which we normally review administratively now anyway. So level 1s and level 2s, any issue that needs to go up goes to SPRAB for final resolution. New construction, the more significant projects would move through Planning Board. Planning Board would have final action of level 3. And then level 4 is where Planning Board would play the role of recommendation because it has something that we would have previously categorized as a conditional use. Increase in density, increase in height, or a flat out conditional use. You know, that we have those too where you can't do a doggy daycare without it being a conditional use, right? So something like that where that would put it squarely back into that LPA role of really looking at how this new development was impacting the city. Single family duplexes and other things would still be approved through building permit like they are now. They're the first step in any building permit is the planning and zoning stop. And if right now, if you can't get past your planning and zoning stop, it doesn't go on to have your HVAC system checked because your building is in the wrong place. So we're not going to waste everybody's time, right? So we did have, we had the good fortune to have a couple of interns working for us this summer, and Ophelia Carter is here, and she and her colleague, Amora, had to go through 5 years of applications to analyze how they were, you know, what did we have? We actually do track them. So we can tell you that, you know, 24% of the applications were a class 1 or a class 2. 30% of the applications were more significant. 4% had a color material change. I think, I can't see the color. No, this is the 20%. I knew that couldn't be right. I'm like, no. So conditional uses and SADs and MDPs, which Planning Board sees, were only 4%. Color and material changes, master sign programs, and then variances, which are typically heard by either HPB or BOA, depending on where the variance is being requested. So under the current 5-year build out is that 41% of the applications were 5 units or less, 59% were more than 5 units, and then about half were up to 15,000 square feet, which is also the threshold for lead review that has been adopted that will start in November. So that's part of why 15,000 was floated as trying to kind of group those types of applications together. And then 53% of the commercial mixed-use projects were more than 15. So the other thing is that because Planning Board would now be playing the role of site plan and architectural review in addition to the LPA role that you've been serving, the makeup of professionally credentialed members would change from 4 to 5. It would be good to have that architectural background as well on this board. And then you would hear appeals or determinations associated with some level 2s. You make recommendations on 4, and relief for the requirements of CBD prior to the consideration of an associated site plan application. You haven't seen this because it's been going through SPRAB, but the form-based code that is downtown, if you want to receive a waiver from it, SPRAB has to hear that particular zoning waiver first before, and then commission takes action, and then we go to the site plan. That's not proposed to change. The commission, particularly with downtown projects, which tend to be the most intense, they directed this change years ago because they didn't like having the whole thing presented to them at the end, and then it was difficult to say no. It was just that pressure. So for downtown, we're going to maintain that, but we want the board that's looking at the whole thing to be the one that makes that recommendation. So that would come here. Final authority on anything that requests a variance. So instead of, again, BOA and the application, there would be a variance relief here. Applications that have requested relief. And anybody who thinks that the parking requirement is too high for them. And again, not wanting to bifurcate who's deciding that the parking is right if they're not looking at the whole site plan. SPRAB would hear any appeal of administrative interpretations, particularly around signs and landscape. Level 1 or level 2 applications that require relief would go up to SPRAB to hear that relief. So one of the most common things SPRAB has been hearing is like a landscape adjustment to a terminal island from 7 feet to 5 feet, just little things like that. And so rather, if everything else could be approved administratively, let's move it up so that they can look at the waiver request and why grant it or deny it, and then have it be able to come back down and go for approval. We do have adopted design guidelines in the city, which as a site plan review and appearance board, this is absolutely in their purview. So we have the CBD has architectural design guidelines related to base, middle, top, or, the rhythm of buildings, and then 7 defined styles. The BPOA design manual has design criteria for those single family houses. Historic Preservation Board would continue to hear the historic preservation design guidelines. And then, like I said, a series of waivers. The duties, powers, and responsibilities of the Board of Adjustment are unchanged. It's just redirecting. For example, currently the Historic Preservation Board can hear variance requests to historic properties. And the idea is that for these larger site plans, that the board acting on the site plan would look at it together. So that DSMG group, which has a very high role in the LDRs, but in practicality has not been used, I think, to its potential recently. It used to be very active, and then over the years, different leadership has made different decisions with it. So there's a couple of ways that this update expands the powers of DSMG to give relief based on technical issues. So, for example, the CRA got a waiver for the building that they've been working on North 5th Avenue. And it was to the storefront requirements of the Central Business District, and which tells you have to have glazing up to 8 feet, right? It's trying to get that window, that traditional Main Street window. They knew that the existing building they were renovating couldn't do it, but they got a waiver to a certain amount. I don't remember exactly what it was. Let's say it was 7 feet 6 inches. When they got into the construction of the building, the header was located in such a point that it had to be 7 feet, but the waiver was only for 7 feet 6 inches. So that project had to go back through HPB for recommendation to commission for final action, where when you have a board of people who understand construction, the building official, the city engineer, the public works director, me, there should be some ability to grant up to a certain percentage additional relief, so that we're not having to go through multiple boards for something that truly is a technical obstacle that can be proven. If it can't, and the board does not approve it, then obviously it would go through the regular waiver adjustment period, or process, excuse me. The other thing that happens a lot is this board is charged with hearing right-of-way reduction requests. If they don't approve it currently, it goes to City Commission for final action. DSMG turns down more than City Commission turns down. And some of that is just based on feeling if we're departing from a policy that's not really our place. It's better just to go forward to Commission. But one of the things that is happening over and over again is particularly in the eastern neighborhoods where the lots are very small, and you have to come in and give 2 feet for the alley, and then now your setback is 10 feet, and you had to give a corner clip, and then you had to give something in the front, and a lot that was already smaller than what the LDRs anticipate just gets more constrained. And so those are frequently accompanied by, I would like a setback waiver because my house will line up with all the houses around me anyway, and why would my house have to back up more just because I gave the right of way, but my neighbor's house hasn't been redeveloped yet? So there's things like that where there would be an ability for DSMG to grant the setback waiver equal to the amount of the right-of-way dedication up to a limit of 5 feet or something where there's a technical limit. So instead of partial review, full review, we're trying where we can to put numerical thresholds on what tips up and what tips down. The other things, so waivers, historic preservation has the authority to approve waivers. throughout the city, except the ones that are those form-based code central business district ones. They still then are doing a recommendation to city commission and then back down to historic for final action. The idea here, again, is how do we provide incentives for people who have taken on the stewardship of historic properties? We're going to let the board, which can already do variances, which is kind of a higher threshold too, here and have final action on those CBD waivers, so that keep in mind you're still looking at Secretary of the Interior, you're looking at all these other things. So, and it still goes to commission as an appealable, but by removing that piece of process, we think that would provide an incentive for historic properties. This has come up before. I think this is more in this board's purview, that we grant a conditional use, which is part of why we don't want density and height to quite be in this bucket. But if we've given a conditional use to allow something, I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head, and the ones that are coming to my mind aren't this, that, by putting pop stroke here, we're not going to have a problem because they agreed to put this enclosure around it that will make sure golf balls never leave and hit Dixie, right? If something continues to be an issue and we need to adjust an approval right now, or late night hours is actually even a better one, because that comes up quite a bit, that if we grant the late night hours, I'm trying to think of the ones you've had recently, bounce, yeah. If we grant this, then we can never take it away if it proves to be a problem, and then it just turns into a code enforcement issue, right? So how do we ensure that those findings that you're making, which is not going to destabilize the neighborhood or have a detrimental effect on property values, that they're meeting what they said, that their mitigation to the impacts is truly successful. This would allow the revocation of a conditional use approval, and it sets the process forward for how the city commission could serve the owner and bring them forward for a quasi-judicial public hearing to reconsider the parameters of the conditional use or remove it if it's proving that it's not consistent with the terms of approval, or that the findings that were used to approve it are clearly not met through its implementation. So this is something I think a lot of people were asking for. And again, part of that elimination of density or incentive, or the density conditional use, but using it in that bucket instead of just making a site plan category for it, where you're doing the full performance reviews for traffic and all that other stuff, is because you can't really take back height or density once they built the building, right? So that's, so we're trying to keep these purely on the uses that are operating. The other thing that's happening is that rezonings are not allowed to be reapplied for within 12 months. You can't just keep bringing it back. But all of the other applications don't actually have this limitation. A lot of them, it's sort of like common sense, like you can't just start it over again. If you got a denial, nothing has changed, don't waste our time type of thing. So this certainly establishes this would expand that looping a request back through after it's been denied to 36 months, so 3 years instead of 1 year. And it maintains the city commission's authority to change that if by a majority vote they want to, but it would hopefully keep us focused on the projects that are sort of ready to move forward. The submission requirements were listed in the LDRs. The survey, a certain age or the survey, a north arrow on your application, a vicinity map on your, that can all be handled on an application. It does not need to live in the LDR, so it's been replaced with a statement saying that the application is to be made on the forms approved by the city, and you can't make up your own form. You have to use the city's form. That's pretty consistent with other communities and what they've done. In lieu at this point is under a zoning in progress, but there's also the question of, is there an expiration once you haven't acted on an in lieu? Some things have been in there that suggest there is if you've never made a payment, or is it just expired? So that's in there, but this will be tackled in a larger effort after this one is finished. So it does have that. This is I tried to make this look better 5 different ways, but at any rate, The notice requirements right now are listed, like then you go down to XJII and not 3I, but IF, like it. So it's a chart. It's now a chart. When do you have to do a mailer? Everybody has to be posted on the web and in City Hall. When is a legal ad required? When is it a display ad? When is it a posted sign? Things like that. This is just purely trying to make it easier for everybody to understand. However, we are taking a cue from some of our surrounding neighbors and other municipalities, including Hollywood. We were talking about even Riviera Beach, Lake Worth Beach. A lot of our neighbors no longer stuff that own mailers. We have, whenever these mailers go out to everyone within 500 feet, the current process is the applicant brings us the envelopes that are stamped, that are addressed using the property appraisers, and you have planners back there with their master's degrees stuffing envelopes, and it's all hands on deck because they have to go out at a certain time period. So we are going to ask for the map and the list of people you mailed it to and the affidavit swearing that you mailed them, and it's on the applicant to provide notice. Same thing with the signage. I do not feel great about taking the sign that we have to post for meetings and sending the planners out to post them. They post them, they take a picture to prove that they were posted. Sometimes they blow away, sometimes somebody takes them, sometimes, and then they're supposed to go out after the meeting, find them again to remove the litter. And this is not really the best use of staff's time either. So we are proposing that we will provide the sign. They already have to pay for it, and they can go post it on their own property. And honestly, just in this day and age, I do have employees that are a little worried about walking onto somebody's private property to post a sign. And they have been challenged before, and I don't think it's appropriate. If the property owner is making a request, I'm sure they can post a sign on their own property rather than raise a potential safety concern for staff. So that's the adjustment there. So this is just my sort of overview about what we're trying to do. And there's 3 ordinances that need your review. It was a lot of material to look through, so I guess I just sort of want to see how you would like to tackle this at this point.
Go ahead. Ms. Blankenship, please.
Hi, thank you guys for such a good presentation. And let me just say I apologize anytime I might have questioned if a notice went out, because I did not know that you guys were mail stuffers on your, it's part of your job description. I guess my first question is, I know that there is discussion about combining planning and zoning and SPRAB, and then how all of this work would figure into that if the commission decides, or whatever happens with that.
That is a great question, and we have updated the commission about the result. So some of us have been very frustrated about how heavy-handed Tallahassee has been on home rule. You may remember a few years ago, they were preempting the ability for municipalities to have design guidelines that apply to single-family or duplex homes, or anything outside of a historic district. And Coral Gables and a couple of other of the heavy-hitting municipalities went to bat and said, no, we already have a board of architects. We already have architecture review boards. Mind you, if you're building a gated community, you're still allowed to have rules, but somehow municipalities regulating neighborhoods on individual lots were not supposed to. So when that rule passed anyway, it had a caveat that if you currently had a design review board, if you had a design review board, not currently, if you had a design review board, you could still do regulations like the BPOA design guidelines that we have, that other neighborhoods ask for things like that for, right? Mm-hmm. And then they met again. I don't remember if it was last session or this session. So they kind of all run together because a lot of places that didn't have a SPRAB made a SPRAB. And said, well, we have one of these boards, so now we're going to have rules. And then so they said, no. We meant if you didn't have one when we made the first rule, because they've loved passing retroactive rules lately. So that happened. Mm-hmm. So when we went to combine the city attorney's office and our team, we worked with 2 separate land use attorneys to ask their opinion on collapsing SPRAB in with PZB. And the advice that came back to us was, given the climate in Tallahassee, we would recommend that you do not even change the name. Address how you want the larger applications to go, but we have to have an LPA planning board for state statutes for planning, local planning, but we can't fold SPRAB into this because we're worried that it would be viewed as the board wasn't here at the time the first rule went in, so now you can't regulate things like that. So we're just afraid to collapse it. So what we've done is collapse the applications and redirect them differently to each board's strength.
I just have one question, maybe Mr. Bennett. And I understand where you're coming from, but aren't some city commissions local planning agencies for their city?
I actually don't know the answer to that question.
I don't know. I just had a thought. Anyway, I understand.
But I don't, to the best of my knowledge, I don't think there's anything in the statute that prohibits a city commission from being a local planning agency, but that one is required.
So we couldn't, and I'm just thinking theoretically because that's a commission, but couldn't P&Z be folded into SPRAB and you're still maintaining your design board, but also having, and I'm just asking a question.
No, I think it's a good question because we kept looking at it the other way.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll check. We can check it.
Because I mean, there's not anything that says it has to come in to make it paying and zoning, but maybe it could be SPRAB and then with, I don't know, just a question. And then my next question is, and I've watched Boca's been working on their response to the Live Local Act, and I'm just not sure if the city is working on that because I think it would affect workforce housing and things like that. If you've even started looking at that?
Yes, we've done an analysis of where the biggest zoning is and what extends a mile out from that.
Okay.
And we just didn't decide to show everybody.
No, that's fine. I just didn't know if it was going to affect like what you've been working so hard on, before us.
And ultimately, I think we haven't had anyone come in wanting to do that yet. And it does help that our city, to get density or intensity, we already have a workforce housing requirement. So I kept expecting, well, you just have to give a little more, that we would have more interest in it than we've had. It does have to be approved administratively, but I think that I would be surprised if we don't see a glitch bill going through Tallahassee, because if that, I mean, it's clearly drafted by people that don't have very tall limits, because it's like the highest or 3 stories. I'm like, where are you at?
Yeah,
geographically. So we would right now. We've also discussed this with colleagues, other directors in other neighboring cities. And right now, if something came through, I think we would still write a whole staff report as if it was going somewhere for the file, for the record. But it doesn't really speak to if relief is needed. And so, we're all sort of waiting to get the first one in the door. And I certainly, just so you all don't think I've gone rogue, I've already talked to the city attorney that should one of these come in, no, I don't have to move them through a board for approval, but that doesn't stop me from giving a presentation to the city commission, letting them know about the application, where it is, what it looks like, how it could be better if they felt like making it better. We're going to make sure that the public outreach is there so that you're aware of it, even if it's well above the thresholds that we're talking about and we have to do it administratively.
I saw Gerald was thinking about putting an entire moratorium in place for 6 months on it, and I thought, good luck with that. And then my last question is, and this is just, if any applications are currently in process and this is passed by commission, they would be grandfathered then to the old way? Or how does that work? Like if I have an application and I expect a process to be a certain way?
So generally speaking, land development regulation amendments are not retroactive. So the rules as they applied at the time the application were submitted would be the rules that the application is reviewed under. It's not a 100% rule all the time, so I don't want to say that it's definitively that way, but generally speaking, if you don't have notice of what the rules that will apply to your development at the time that you submit your application, those rules can't be applied to you.
Okay. Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you, Ms. Blankenship. Anybody else? Questions, comments? Want me to start? Go ahead. Ms. Morrison?
No, you go. I have a lot of questions, so
I
maybe
just
yours
have a
will
simple one.
alleviate some of mine.
So, do any of these changes, would any of them preclude that go around that occurred where somebody changed a zoning to SAD to avoid going through a zoning change to the proper zoning? Does any of this preclude that type of activity?
So, I mean, ultimately, the SAD, I like SAD, is a zoning district, and it's reviewed with the rezoning standards. I think I think where you're asking is that SAD is intended to be for large-scale mixed-use development,
Right.
Parks at Delray.
Special.
Right, or uses that are not otherwise accommodated. You're bringing in something truly unique, and there's not a logical zoning for it. And we've seen a lot of SADs start coming in on Congress asking for residential multifamily,
right,
but in exchange for a higher percentage of workforce housing. Staff can continue to point out that condos are not special and they're accommodated in other places, but ultimately that hasn't been the decision that has been made by the enacting board. So this does not change right now the zoning districts that we have or the process that we use for rezoning. So, yeah.
So it doesn't. So, and just one other item. So when you have this TAC and this development design team, do you ever say to the developer, that will never be approved? I'm thinking specifically of Sherwood Forest trying to put a a rest home in the middle of a single-family neighborhood. So does anybody ever say to them, that'll never get approved?
Ms. Morrison, I just want to interrupt a second. That is something that no member of city staff could tell an applicant. Okay?
Really?
I think Mr. Bennett will concur.
No, I would say in my experience, being on TAC as well, that staff does an adequate job of communicating to them difficulties that they may encounter in trying to get certain aspects of their project approved.
Right.
But ultimately, the decision makers are the board members or the commission. So I think it'd be inappropriate, and I've never seen a staff member say, when pigs fly, so, but they do an excellent job of communicating that, these waivers are not typically granted, or, that
that's
there's
a pretty high
these-
hurdle you got to get over.
So staff gives recommendations and tries to give them direction to help create the best possible project with a high likelihood of passing, but the applicants, they're in charge of their project, and ultimately it's either the 7 board members on
They're
one of the 3
entitled
boards
to
we have, or the 5
due
commissioners that
process.
make that decision.
They're entitled to
Okay.
due process,
Now-
essentially.
Thank you.
What we have done is we've said things like, to your point about the hurdles, and you'll appreciate this, you can build what you can park. So there's a point where we have such a high volume of applications, and we have all of the good work that the boards want us to get to that are set out to do in the comp plan. So if there is a project that you're bringing a restaurant and you have no parking, there's a point where I'm not going to let you keep going through TAC to work out your drainage calcs and your air conditioning location. Let's go hear the relief that you're requesting for parking now, because otherwise the rest of this is time consuming for a project that can't be built. We've also had other applications that have come in that that clearly did not read the zoning district regulations. Nothing on them is right, and we've just handed it back. And the TAC comment is, please submit something consistent with this section of the LDR that you are proposing to build in. That's the most that's the most brutal we've ever been, I suppose.
Well, I'm only saying this because we've learned our lesson in certain pivotal areas of our city, what does not work. A Chick-fil-A on the corner of a major intersection does not work, where it's accessed from one of those 2 major arterial streets. It doesn't work. And now that we've learned that, can we apply that knowledge Can we apply that knowledge to somebody coming forward trying to do that exact same thing at the corner of Military and Atlantic? You know, I think we've learned our lesson in certain things.
The problem with it is, Ms. Morrison, is that we knew that was a problem with Chick-fil-A ahead of time, but they're coming in this fast food restaurant. But everybody in the industry knows a Trader Joe's does a lot more traffic per square foot than an El Presidente, okay? And a Chick-fil-A does a lot more business per square foot than an Arby's, okay? But our code doesn't allow for that differentiation is really the problem, okay? So, you know, unfortunately, we can't have the Chick-fil-A rule, which says, hey, you know, for a given size store, you guys need twice the lot size for the
Chick-fil-A
stack
rule, yeah.
for the stacking. And I'm just being honest with you. I know this because my cousin owns 3 Chick-fil-A restaurants, and he tells me, he goes, they find the lowest producing restaurant they can find in any given area, and that's the data they supply. I get it. Everybody gets it. But, you know, our staff, even when it came to, take for instance, Delray Place, you look at Chick-fil-A there, I think everybody's sitting back wondering how it's going to work with the Nordstroms and the other stuff they're going to put in there with Park. But that development's been another tough one.
Yeah, that was a mess from the beginning.
Right,
we all foresaw what was going to happen with that.
Right, but...
And it was still approved.
Exactly.
I'm just saying that
so the point that I'm making is that we can't ask staff to do more than what they can. That's the point.
Understand.
And just like our boards, when somebody, you know, I wish I could turn somebody and say like, oh, wait a minute, buddy. You're coming in here with a Chick-fil-A on that size lot? Like, let's talk reality. It's not an Arby's or a Wendy's. But
you're right.
We are where we are. Everybody's trying to do their best, especially staff.
Oh, absolutely.
So,
No question.
Mr. Zeller, excuse me, Ms. Morrison, Mr. Zeller.
It's always a problem when you have a successful business that draws in people when you didn't expect that they're going to be that successful. So it's not, you know, similarly like what you're saying with that Trader Joe's or the Chick-fil-A, or even the amount of cars that can queue up that meet the regulations, but yet they're successful, so they run out onto the highway and block the roads and things such as that. Or it could be just a regular shopping center where a couple of the businesses get just sort of inadvertently that are brought in are successful, like Trader Joe's, and it ties up all the other stores and the parking. So that I don't know how we can stop that, except I do agree that putting, you know, a business like Chick-fil-A on a major highway where we typically know that they're going to queue out onto the highway is a difficult choice. But I have a lot of comments and questions. So like in this process, does the level 5 site plan stay with SPRAB now?
So there would only be 4 levels, and level 5 site plans would come through Planning and Zoning Board for recommendation with final action by City Commission. So this board would see it and recommend approval or denial to City Commission.
Okay.
I'm sorry. It's a level 4. Amy said I said the wrong number. Sorry. Level 4.
All right, so there's only 4 levels, and that level 4 goes to the Planning and Zoning Board.
For recommendation to City Commission for final action.
Okay. So on, just going through the staff letter, I made a lot of notes. You know, and some of the comments that you have in here, you know, really hit the nail on the head, because one of the concerns is like on page 1 at the very end, where you talk about eliminating the current bifurcation of certain requests. That's always been a problem. And that's what it appears to me that the developers do. They like to piecemeal their application and get an approval on one thing and then come back for something exponentially greater than what was contemplated or approved. So I think that is an excellent idea, to make them come in at one time with a fully complete application and either prohibit or regulate the applications that can be bifurcated. So and you've done that or commented on that, particularly in the beginning with these historic review board reviews and whatever. But I think if it can be expanded to all the boards, whichever board gets it should have a complete view. So that they can't bifurcate, say, a conditional use and then a site plan later on. I think so in the level 3, does that still can that still be appealed to the commissioner, level 3 and level 2? Do they get appealed to the commissioners?
Yes, and they currently do now, but it would be a level 3 with the Planning and Zoning Board, right? And then it would so if Planning and Zoning Board approved the development, then it would appear on the commission's appealable report, and then the commission could appeal it or the applicant could appeal it, which is the way that it works now. So,
okay.
But instead of SPRAB, it would come to PZB.
The other point that I like is on page 3, the elimination of the conditional use to obtain density incentive. And, you know, there again, that's where they come in and they piecemeal the application. But I hate to bring up the dirty word again on this workforce housing business, but you know, you recognize in here on page 3 in that last paragraph that the workforce housing is another city priority. But the way that is limited to only certain types of applications, I think it should be expanded that any application that is looking for multifamily housing over, say, 10 or 12 units, it should be required to have a component of workforce housing. And because that's the only way you're going to get it. And it should be a spread of not just moderate income that is listed in that those projects like out, I forget the zone on Congress or whatever, by the transport, by the train stations and whatever. It should just be an even distribution of very low, and moderate income housing. And since we're required by state law, which Mr. Bennett knows I say is an illegal infringement upon the constitutional concept of home rule, but since we seem to be stuck with that autocratic issue that comes out of Tallahassee, it would be good that the workforce housing would be included, that it says that if an applicant comes in and wants a density bonus in their multifamily, that per se is an incentive that the city is giving, and recognize that, even if it's like in the legislative history or the legislative intent, the city's legislative intent of what's required, so that they know, a developer knows, if they want a density bonus or if they want a height waiver, considerations, things such as that those are incentives. And if they get those incentives, then they have to include in their development that there be an adequate amount of workforce or affordable low housing in all of the categories. Then, like on the top of page 4, the reapplication after a denial, I think it's good that you extend that time period, but I would suggest that if they resubmit the same request, that's pretty limiting, because they're going to make a change to it. They're going to make some change. Maybe they'll change the number of parking spaces, or maybe they'll change a little bit of the density. So, if they change the parking spaces, they say, okay, we've added 5 parking spaces. Right. That's not, that to me is the same request. It should say a substantial change. They have to come back in with a substantial change in order to even in the 36 months make that request. I'm not sure under the 4th one down, elimination of obsolete practices relative to outside agencies. I wasn't sure what that meant. Okay. But would they be required when they submit to submit fully engineered plans with what their other proposal is?
Yes, no, they are. There's a process in our LDRs that must reflect a system Palm Beach County used years ago for traffic. It's not accurate with how it works now. So there's a couple of things. So the way that the TPS letters come to us, then we can comment back if the county says that you have to widen this road and we don't agree, then we might contact them. But it was written the other way around, that like our city engineer would make the recommendations to the county on how to meet the county's transportation performance standard. It's backwards in the code. So we worked with the city engineer in terms of updating it to more accurately reflect his role. There's also language that said that the city engineers certified the drainage plans or certified the engineering plans. They don't certify them. It's an outside design company that would sign and seal plans. He approves them, whether it's at the building permit or part of that. So some of that language was changed to, instead of certified, to approve, some things like that, because it seemed to think that, I don't know, that somehow we were signing and sealing, and that's not, maybe back in the day, I don't know, but it wasn't accurate. So that's what the obsolete language is, just changing it to reflect the more consistent with what the process actually is.
Okay. And then under public notice, I think it's a good idea that takes the responsibility away from the department. That's always a pain in the neck, particularly if there's 20 or 30 or 40 different people, property owners within the 500 feet. But I think they should, I think the developer, or more, 100, who knows?
If you hit one of those condos, sir, it's game over.
With a condo?
Oh, there will be 200 mailers.
Can you,
She's done 1,000 before, and it, yeah.
can you limit it with that? Can you limit it so that you don't have to give the individual notice to all the condo owners, but to the condo association?
No.
Nope, can't do that, by the
All
way.
right, too bad.
Nope.
We have found out, though, that West Palm, some of these places have just an outside agency that has this business doing this now. So we're going to just respectfully suggest our applicants utilize one of those and give us the list of who they mailed with the map and some form swearing they did it.
All right, so
Yeah.
I'll pass on that comment, but
I've been in plenty of other jurisdictions where the attorney or the representative of the applicant has to mail everybody regular mail and CMRR and provide records to the city and a sworn affidavit.
Yeah,
That's
they
it.
should provide an affidavit of service as to everybody, to you, as to everybody that they served, you know, at least 10 days before the hearing, with a list, and they certify that they notified everybody, and takes that burden off of you and puts the burden on them. And so all you have to do is just check the list against who they have on their list. On page 4 at the very end, the policy changed to section 4.3.4J. Can you also include, if you do change that concept to say that a density bonus constitutes a per se incentive, that a height increase also constitutes a per se incentive? And I guess you can sort of make it easy by saying the level of like 12 or 15, something divisible by 3, so you always get an equal spread of very low, low, and moderate. On page 5 at the top where it says, in most zoning districts, the review and approval process was eliminated. It was retained in sections where the process for a particular zoning district is unique to that district. Section 4.4.13 CBD, the CBD waiver process was relocated to Chapter 2 for consistency and to make it simpler to locate the relief requirement. So does that also make it simpler to receive, or just it makes it simpler to
No, right now,
find?
4413 is the section that has the zoning district regulations for central business district. And if you're getting a waiver in CBD, there are additional standards. So you have to meet all the usual standards that are in 247 right now. But then you have other ones, I think there's 4 additional ones, if I'm remembering, for CBD, that you're not degrading a primary street, which is where we expect a lot of pedestrian activity, that you're not impacting a civic open space. There's 4. They were simply moved to section 2. They were not relaxed or eliminated. They're just so that the waiver standards are in section 2, and if you're in CBD, these also apply. So rather than having it in 2 different places.
Okay, then, thank you. And then moving on to, on that same page, the family workforce housing, where, again, the ordinances relate to the creation of 3 specific overlay districts with workforce housing density bonuses. There again, I think it should be expanded to all zoning districts where they're building workforce housing. Otherwise, we're never going to get anything to accommodate this city priority. And in section, at the bottom of page 5, section 4.7.8, with the resale and subsequent rental of affordable units, there should be a requirement that when there is included with workforce housing, that there also be a requirement for a deed restriction, a 30-year deed restriction, to make sure that when it's sold, that it doesn't get sold at a market rate.
Yeah, so that's already a policy within this section. It looks like when you read the ordinance that a lot was changed, but the only thing that was actually changed from our existing policies was removing the conditional use process. I think you referred at the beginning to the 3 areas. When the ordinance was adopted back in 2007, it was only applicable to 3, but since the initial adoption of the regulations, we've added on a number of workforce housing incentive areas in addition to those 3 that were initially in the regulation. So just the whole ordinance, the whole Article 4.7, the way it was written was very hard to follow, and it duplicated a lot of information. So it's essentially a restructuring apart from that reference to conditional use that was removed.
Okay, because definitely get a sense that after the first sale, or maybe after the second sale, you lose the context of that it's an affordable unit.
No.
For everything that you
there's
fought
a deed
for.
restriction.
Yeah.
There's a legal deed restriction.
There's
on
either
that
deed
seller.
restrictions or
Yeah.
a covenant, and then
Yep.
our neighborhood community services department has like a process in which they monitor all these properties too.
Just
So,
like they do in New Jersey.
yeah.
They monitor them down here with a deed restriction. It comes right up in a title search.
Yeah, if there is, but
What do you mean if there is?
There are
There's no other way to do
instances-
it.
No, there are instances where some of the developments, like SOFA, where they had a X number of affordable units, my understanding is that they've disappeared. That when it gets rented to somebody else, there's not a definitive way of knowing that that's still an affordable unit to be rented. It's easy when you're selling a condo or a unit because you have a deed restriction.
No, but
So they actually don't assign it to a specific
Right.
unit. It has to be a percentage and a number. And
Right.
Alan and Ferline have Excel sheets and spreadsheets and do yearly audits, and I actually work with them a bit on those, so I know a little bit more about their processes. But they have a whole system in which they're making sure that there's compliance, and the developers, according to the covenant, supply a monthly report on the number of units and proof of income and other things. So
yeah, it's not like a new owner of SOFA can all of a sudden just come in and be like, nah, renting the whole place at market. There's checks and balances with the city, Ms. Seller.
If you're saying
Well,
so.
I think the issue what it feeds more into Mr. Zeller's previous comment about utilizing more than one income, because a lot of the buildings downtown, prior to some of the changes that have happened, allowed only moderate.
Moderate, of
That
course.
is up to 120 AMI, and honestly, those units rent fairly close to market, which is why I think the perception in some of those older developments are that they're not there.
But
The
there's
rental
parts
apartments,
of our code,
right? The rental,
but as we know, there's parts of our code
Right.
that still only require moderate.
right? And so, if they were approved under that, the moderate rental rate doesn't look particularly affordable when we look at it sometimes. But
They're meeting the letter of the law.
right, and they are tracked on a monthly basis, and there is an annual audit done. In the rental units, to your point, do float as opposed to the houses that
Right.
are easier
Identified to one individual unit, like Unit E1 is always going to be affordable. But
But see, sometimes the developers, if they know they're building an affordable unit, they don't include all the same amenities that they would include in, say, a market rate
different
unit.
story.
So
That's
if
a
they're
different
putting-
story.
If they're putting
Sorry.
granite kitchen table, granite cabinet tops they'll put,
That doesn't
charge
happen
more.
that
Now
often,
they
to be
charge
honest
extra
with you.
fees. Now
Because,
they charge extra
but,
fees.
right, but it's more the fees that they're charging for garbage collection and stuff like that, which fall outside the rent purview. I understand what you're saying, but to be honest with you, that used to be more of a problem than in the old days where people would be like, I'm putting in ceramic tile baths and fiberglass surrounds in the affordable units, or they're going to get laminate countertops and the other people are going to get granite. Nowadays, when they're building these 300-unit complexes, it's more of a headache for them to take 12 units and say, we're going to build them different, rather than just throwing in the same mass of stuff. So that's what I've found, Mr. Zeller.
okay. All right, well, those are my comments. I think overall, you know, the proposals are well needed and well presented.
Mr. Snyder?
Nope.
No?
Simpler's better.
Okay. Mr. Brown?
Well, I live in the world of multifamily, and we're now going through a period of crisis period where you're not going to see very many multifamily businesses. Most of the large multifamily developers.
Greg, you want to
put
turn
their-
on your mic? We
Can't hear you.
Paul, you got to step forward too, Mr. Brown.
Most
Thank
of
you,
the-
Mr. Brown.
Most of the multifamily builders that I know have put their project on hold. So irrespective of the comments of Mr. Geller, you have to look at the economics as well. So you have to be flexible. Because at some point, when you're too onerous on one thing or another, the developer is going to say, forget it, I'm not going to build it. I can't afford to build it. So you have to be very, very careful about that. Now, when they're in a CRA, it's a little bit different because the CRA can provide money for workforce housing units like Mr. Geller is trying to reach, but not everybody's in a CRA. And the CRAs are all going to expire pretty soon because they're not popular with the counties. The counties don't like paying into the CRA, so they want the money for themselves. So you have to be I just warn you, Madam Director, you have to be flexible, and you don't want to kill projects because essentially you are in the redevelopment business as well. And so there has to be a balance. Now, how do you get money to fund affordable housing? The city needs to create a fund for affordable housing. Now they can rely on the CRA, and most CRAs, for example, Delray is one of the larger ones. West Palm is a $50 million a year CRA. Our firm works for the CRA in West Palm Beach. It's huge. It's a huge CRA. Do they fund affordable housing? Yes, they do. But they use the CRA funds to do that. But it's not going to last forever. So eventually, Madam Director, you're going to have to create a platform where the taxpayers are going to have to fund affordable housing. There's no other choice.
Good luck.
Well,
listen, I'm in agreement.
Listen, we're
with
not
Mr.
having a
Geller.
discussion about affordable housing. We're talking about 4 ordinances tonight. Okay?
I was saying,
Ms. Blankenship.
I don't always agree with Mr. Zeller, but you have to weigh the economics of it. That's my comment.
Well, I've asked my question, but I do have one more question for Anthea since I have her before me. And I know that you were talking about the E-plans. And is that fully rolled out, or is it just for permitting and you're looking to expand it to, site plans and?
Yes, so it is rolled out for building permits right now. Everything is online except demo permits I'm not sure if that permit has, it was the only outlier. So that's fully worked out. Our IT is now working with neighborhood and community services for streamlining BTR, some of their things. And there's, Project Docs was the first part of ePlans. There's a larger enterprise system that's also coming online that's more of a 3-year build out. We wanted to get this part going first just for not to be passing paper plan roll sets among 4 buildings. so that's been great, and people are definitely responding to it. It's taking a lot of time behind the scenes for a lot of the managers, so it's over in another department right now so that they can work on it. We can have a break, and then it's going to come back to do planning. Okay. So planning will, I should get a timeline for that, actually. I haven't
well, I didn't see it in the CIP, and so I was
No,
just
it's already paid for.
Okay.
It's part of, it's a multiple, it was approved, I think, 2 CIPs ago, and then the contract's been rolled, because it is going to be a multi-year build-out, but we do have the funding for it, so we're not at any kind of funding disadvantage.
Okay, so I was thinking about you when I saw it. And then this whole situation, what you're doing is not going to really overburden you guys to change what's already in the E-plans as far as
No,
process.
I think that, and honestly, I wrote down the LPA question, and I know at the beginning, we beat that to death, and I think we're going to go back and check it one more time.
I'm pretty sure Boynton
because
said this
the other
during
issue was, we haven't solved anything if we collapse the boards, and then planning board is so overburdened, you're here till midnight twice a month too. Like, we were trying to figure out how to divide and conquer it, so that things could move more smoothly. And the really important things were getting the time in front of the boards, and some of the things that are absorbing time that, I paint color. It's changeable.
Yeah.
Density and height are not. So, right. At any rate. So, I don't think so. We have a strong TAC team. And so ultimately, if you've met everything for the LDRs and some of these smaller developments, then, that should be easy to simplify. And then we can focus on the bigger issues at hand with the boards.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Howell?
Just a couple of things. Have you thought about dividing it by project? I mean, in other words, rather than the function or the request, shall I say, which we've had this ongoing problem, between SPRAB and us, and how the bifurcated review works, right? They're frustrated they don't have certain things. We approved a lot of density, and then they say, we don't like that. And some of the same things for us. So just a question, have you thought about, like, for example, a certain project comes in and it's assigned to either P&Z or SPRAB, maybe they have similar capabilities?
So my only concern off the top of my head is that you might create some inconsistency and or what we call forum shopping. So you're going to specifically try to wait and find out whether PZB or SPRAB is going to get the next application. Where in this way, if the type of application, not just one for one, doling them out evenly, you're going to get consistency out of the board decisions. You're going to get consistency out of the application of the land development regulations, and you're going to avoid a developer potentially purposefully waiting until they know they're going to be going to one board or the other.
Well, you could do, a coin toss. You could do something completely, happenstance as far as determining which board got it. And the consistency would be provided by the staff and their expertise. It's just a thought, because I'm just wondering if it's not going to just continue in some ways, even under this. Do you feel like that what you're suggesting here is going to take care of that problem of the bifurcation and the...
I think most of the issues related to bifurcation, yes, because I think they're related to the density decisions that are going through. And if we're going to consider height or density or conditional uses, this board is the use regulator, so you should see the site plan as well. I think ultimately the question is more likely to be level 3s that don't have that if they stay with SPRAB as opposed to go here. But we're trying to get this board to be the one really regulating major development.
Right,
and SPRAB really doing what they were formed to do, which is that landscape design or design guideline appeal sort of role.
Okay, all right, just a question. I'm sure you've given it a lot of thought, and I really appreciate your whole revamp of this. I think it's going to be an improvement. The only other question I have is, What is the thinking behind changing the makeup of P&Z from 4 to 5 professionally credentialed, or people who have ties to the real estate development industry?
Well, if you're going to be taking over what was previously a SPRAB authority, then SPRAB has that number.
So they have 5 right now.
They
out of
have
7.
5 out of 7. HPB also has a high number because they're looking at the design site plan. So the idea was that if this board is taking over those roles, that it should have that. Now that we've discussed whether or not we should be reducing the number of required board members, and that gives staff heartburn because we're the ones, when there isn't a quorum or something. So we'd rather have 7 of you rather than 5 and things like that. So we've talked about now we have to find another professional willing to serve compared to the other boards. So do we reduce the number that are required on other boards and things like that? But if this is going to be the main board that's reviewing the biggest development in the cities, we want to have the same technical staff or makeup as SPRAB and HPB are required to have. So,
well, I just was curious because, the trade-off there that we're really not talking about is this is a board that'll have a major impact on residents' quality of life. And you're going to end up with people on the board that are tied to that industry, to the development industry in one way or the other. As with all due respect to everyone, the residents they'll have 2 potential people here. I think you've got a great mix right now where you have 4, where you've got 4 people that are required to have some sort of professional expertise in the industry, and you have 3 that are residents of the town. So I don't know. I understand what you're saying, but from my experience, I'm one of those residents. You guys as staff are terrific at guiding us and giving us understanding of what is the criteria that we should be evaluating projects on. So I have a lot of confidence in you and confidence that you can guide people even if they don't have a technical expertise. So I don't know, that would just be my only comment, to maybe give that a little more thought.
And if you do move it to the new number, maybe consider alternates, like maybe having 2 alternates on. No? Okay. Mr. Bennett said no, never mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, nightmare.
I agree with Ms. Howell's comments on that as well.
Ms. Morrison?
I'm good.
Oh, you good?
Thank you.
Great. And I just want to say, listen to everybody's comments. I agree with most of them. And I think that the moves you're making here regarding the level 1, the level 2, the level 3, and the level 4, I think I'm in favor of all of them. And, to tell you the truth, I was sitting here doing the math, going 5 units or less is really an 18,000 square foot multifamily lot at 12 DUs to the acre. So, as far as I'm concerned, you could have even made it 6 and just called it a half acre. Half acre? You know what I mean? Just call it a half acre at 12 units to the acre. But I'm just throwing that out to you because, for argument's sake, a thorough review should take place on Seaside's switch of the office building on the Barrow Island within the SAD district. Big project, office building, even though the zoning's not changing, it's an effective change in zoning and a change of use. But by the same token, Mr. Schiller's project that's 100 yards up the road, that's 3 units, if he's coming in and he's all conforming, he shouldn't have to go through the arduous process and everything else. If he's coming in with a conforming application and you got a minimal number of units, yeah, that guy should get a bypass to come around the bottleneck. And, as I said, I was just throwing it out because I just thought, keeping in mind what Mr. Zeller said about numbers divided by 3, if you made that number 6, you're essentially just saying it's a half a unit. If you keep it at 15,000 square feet, and you want to keep the same threshold, you're talking about 4 dwelling units to the acre, essentially. 15,000 square feet, about a third of an acre. You know, so you might want to think about making it either 4 or 6 to kind of keep it about the same threshold. So just a thought. But other than that, I think everything you're doing is spot on.
Do you guys need a vote?
Yes, we have three separate ordinances, so 3 separate motions.
Whose vocal cords are loose?
See them scrolling.
Christina was saving herself.
Oh, here I am.
Clear your throat. Take a sip of water,
Let me
Christina.
do it here. Okay.
Take a sip of water first. There you go.
The first one is Chapter 2 Administrative Provisions. Recommend approval to the City Commission of Ordinance Number 31-23, amending Chapter 2 Administrative Provisions of the Land Development Regulations by repealing and replacing the adopted language, finding that the amendment and approval thereof is consistent with the comprehensive plan and meets the criteria set forth in land development regulations.
Second?
Second.
Can I just ask a question? Does that
Second for
Now?
discussion.
Now?
No, well, just on the vote.
Go
I mean,
ahead.
you have to have
For
comment on
discussion.
the
Go
vote.
ahead.
Does that preclude them from including some of the suggestions?
No, City Commission, you know,
They have
routinely
they've
makes
taken
tweaks,
copious
you
notes
know,
here.
even after recommendations
Okay,
from
so
here.
it doesn't have to say as amended.
No, because what we made were suggestions.
Okay.
Correct, Ms. Bennett?
Correct.
That's all we can do,
So
right?
let the record show, motion by Ms. Morrison, second by Ms. Blankenship. Ms. Miller, if you can call the roll, please.
Gregory Snyder,
Yes.
Christina Morrison.
Yes.
Alan Zeller,
Yes.
Joy Howell.
Yes.
Chris Brown,
Yes.
Julian Blankenship,
Yes.
Chris Davy.
Yes. Let the record show, the amendment to chapter ordinance number 3123 passed 7-0. Motion number 2.
Okay, Chapter 4 Zoning Regulations. Recommend approval to the City Commission of Ordinance Number 32-23, amending Chapter 4 Zoning Regulations of the Land Development Regulations to provide consistency with the language in Chapter 2 Administrative Provisions adopted by Ordinance Number 3123, finding that the amendment and approval thereof is consistent with the comprehensive plan and meets the criteria set forth in land development regulations.
Second.
Let the record show, motion by Ms. Morrison, second by Ms. Howell. Ms. Miller, if you can please call the roll.
Gregory Snyder,
Yes.
Christina Morrison.
Yes.
Alan Zeller,
Yes.
Joy Howell.
Yes.
Chris Brown,
Yes.
Julian Blankenship,
Yes.
Chris Davy.
Yes, let the record show that item passed 7-0. Last motion.
Okay, Chapter 3 Performance Standards and Chapter 6 Infrastructure and Public Property. Recommend approval to the City Commission of Ordinance Number 33-23, amending Chapter 3 Performance Standards and Chapter 6 Infrastructure and Public Property to provide consistency with the language in Chapter 2 Administrative Provisions adopted by Ordinance Number 31-23, finding that the amendment and approval thereof is consistent with the comprehensive plan and meets the criteria set forward in land development regulations.
Second.
Let the record show, motion by Ms. Morrison, second by Ms. Howell. Ms. Miller, if you could please call the roll.
Gregory Snyder,
Yes.
Christina Morrison.
Yes.
Alan Zeller,
Yes.
Joy Howell.
Yes.
Chris Brown,
Yes.
Julian Blankenship,
Yes.
Chris Davy.
Yes, let the record show that item also passed 7-0. Thank you, Ms. Gianotis, Ms. Alvarez, Ms. Dossary, Ms. Rodriguez. Thank you.
So,
Comments?
Yeah, I have a comment.
Go ahead.
Let the record
Look at him,
show
he's like, yeah,
that
I got a
voted
comment.
yes on every application.
What do you want? A birthday? What do you want? A piece of candy?
Yeah, exactly. Were you gonna say birthday?
I was gonna say.
Well, I know whose
Nuts to
birthday it
you.
is. Happy birthday, Miss Dossary.
Happy birthday.
Amy and I promised we would be here and that she could not. But she worked so hard on the Chapter 2.
Poor
She
thing.
came to see it to the
Right.
8:15 on her birthday.
I do have something from Ms. Howell here, a certificate of appreciation since since this is your last meeting, we just wanted to say how much we've appreciated how you've always been so involved and present and really engaging and thorough. Yes, thorough. So
Thank you so much. That's very sweet. Thank you.
Great. Comments by anybody?
I just want to say I've so enjoyed working with all of you. You are such first-rate professionals. You really are, all of you, including you, Mr. Bennett.
Wait a minute. He doesn't allow us to look at the pictures.
I know. I've forgiven him, okay? And to my
when asked that Mr. Zeller is to drop something on the floor, and while Mr. Bennett comes down, they can flash it on the screen.
And to my fellow board members, just such a pleasure. I mean, really, all of you. You give so much time. You're so dedicated. It's really been terrific. And finally, to Diane, who keeps us all straight and organized no matter what. We can't avoid her. She's right there all the time.
Even if we don't respond to
Even if we don't respond. That's
right.
right. Anyway, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Joy. Thank you. Do we have any comments by Mr. Bennett or Ms. Dossery before we leave? Before our next meeting, we're going to have one item next month, right?
Right. Just that it's September 25th. We had a conflict with commission, so we had to move it to the 25th. So just.
Oh, so it's not the 18th.
No,
No.
it's moved.
You announced that last month, I think. Yes. Mr. Bennett?
Just briefly, I know I've said it to her in person more times than I can count, but I want to publicly thank Miss Brandon for filling in my absence and giving you guidance. It means more to me than I could put into words, and I just want to say it's a pleasure to be back with you guys, and good to see you, and look forward to seeing you in September.
We look forward to seeing you too.
We're glad you're back, Mr. Bennett.
Welcome back, Mr. Bennett. Anything else? Meeting adjourned. All right.
Ready to go.
Yeah, come on. I'm ready to pull the plug. This thing is 17. You saw that.
I want to ask this.
Yes.